How does he bring back that aura of a company who has such share and such resources available to them? I want to hear how he's going to instill that way to win and that swoosh that means something back in the conversation.
How to make Nike cool again? It is an urgent question. Dana, really great to preview it with you. That is Dana Telsey of the Telsey Advisory Group. Now, coming up, private lenders are trying to attract retail investors. We'll discuss next in our Wall Street Beat. This is Bloomberg.
Fixed Income Fix. Half an hour dedicated to fixed income. Watch Bloomberg Real Yield. Context changes everything. Bloomberg covers the world with unmatched reach and resources. From more than 120 countries. The moment news breaks, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
It's the countdown to the market open as we bring you the first trades across Europe.
We'll debate the most important stories and what will drive the big investment decisions throughout the morning. I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Kriti Gupta.
And I'm Anna Edwards. Join us every weekday morning for the opening trade, live at 7 a.m. here in London.
Only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Up-to-the-minute geopolitical news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Stephen Engel at the Forbidden City in Beijing, and this is Bloomberg.
And it's time now for the Wall Street Beat. We're going to take a closer look at how Wall Street is trying to refuel the private credit boom. Direct lenders are hoping retail investor strategies can increase growth because investments from asset managers, pension funds, large institutional investors have flatlined. Here for more, we are joined by Bloomberg's Denitsa Seikova, who has been reporting on Wall Street's big Main Street push. You think about the returns you can get in some of these interval funds. You were talking about one woman that is getting a 37% return over 2 years, wanting to access more. Do these last? I mean, ultimately, do retail investors believe that they can get above average returns over the longer term by shifting some of their allocations over?
For sure. So in the last 2 years, it's been obviously a very lucrative investment, and all the retail traders we spoke to are quite happy with the returns. It's been a good time. Also, a lot of the retail investors we spoke to, they're investing in all those big names. They have Carlyle, they have Blackstone, which potentially have much longer history and less issues with redemptions, even though some of those firms do have issues. But now what we're seeing is amazing proliferation, and we're talking specifically about interval funds, and so many big and small names are entering the space. And what we're seeing is that with any proliferation, products come with different quality, different minimums. The thing about interval funds is you can lock up investors for significant time. So you can imagine we've seen some funds lock up investors for 7 years. Oh, wow. A lot of the big names, it's much lower. People can redeem their shares every quarter. So it's a lot more accessible. Well, we've seen some extremes in terms of how long those products are holding investors.
And so we only have about a minute left with you, but I am curious what the pitch is, because of course you highlight a woman, like Shanali said, 37% return over 2 years, but you could get that or better in the public markets just by investing in the S&P 500.
For sure. I think the pitch is we're diversifying, we're giving you access to something only institutional and ultra wealthy individuals have access to, which I think is quite attractive to retail investors. That one thing that comes with the pitch is actually the fees are pretty high. And at least from the conversations, I'm not sure everyone's aware how high the fees are. Like the average fee is around 2.6%. And then a lot of those products work with incentive fees. So after you reach a certain threshold, you have like a 20% incentive fees. So if you had a great year, that's great, obviously. But then there are extra fees and extra fees. So it could be quite pricey.
Plus, you have to find out where you're going to actually buy this stuff.
True.
And, you know, Apollo, Blackstone, they're trying to make this available for infrastructure, for private equity. Let's see if they could be as successful in those other products.
Got to get it on the apps. Denitsa, fantastic reporting. As always, appreciate you taking the time. That is Bloomberg's Denitsa Seikova. And coming up in the next hour, Brian Lake from Goldman joins us at the desk. And then we'll speak to Bill Dudley about the Fed, as well as Coupa's CEO joining us in the C-suite. This is Bloomberg.
In recent years, you created an institute, the Jane Goodall Institute, and what is that designed to do?
Well, that was started in 1977 when by then I had a little research station and 4 of my students were kidnapped and everything shut down. And so some friends of mine said, well, let's start an institute so that this research can carry on. Bless them. So that was 1977, and it was set up to study, conserve chimpanzees and other animals and educate. And it's developed since then. So it's, you know, we've got 27 Jane Goodall Institutes around the world. And then I realized at some point that the African people living in and around chimpanzee habitats right across Africa were struggling to survive. There was crippling poverty, lack of health and education, moving deeper into the forest, being exposed to diseases like Ebola and HIV from the chimpanzees and vice versa. It hit me. If we don't help these people to find ways of making a living without destroying their environment, conservation won't work.
Good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade.
This is Bloomberg Technology.
This is the Asia Trade.
You're watching The Close.
Welcome to Balance of Power.
This is Bloomberg. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. Bloomberg ETF IQ, only on Bloomberg.
CBS News on the Hour, sponsored by Progressive Insurance.
I'm Deborah Rodriguez. We're hearing from Syria's deposed dictator Bashar al-Assad for the first time since his ouster a week ago. In a statement, he claims he wanted to remain in his country and fight, but Russia insisted he leave after rebels seized Damascus. The BBC's Steve Rosenberg.
He says that this departure wasn't planned. He claims that he stayed in Syria until Sunday, December the 8th. As it became clear at that point, Syrian forces had completely withdrawn from all battle lines and that the last army positions had fallen.
Assad and his family are in Moscow now. CBS News has just learned a man was arrested with a loaded gun in his car outside the Pentagon last week after he tried to speed off with Department police officers clinging to his car. Court documents reveal the suspect, Khalil Nagbi, had a device in his underwear that would allow the weapon to fire as a machine gun. A separate filing says he had 14 pounds of pot in the trunk. 26-year-old Luigi Mangione, the suspect accused of killing United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, could be brought back to New York City from Pennsylvania as early as this week to face charges. CBS's Anna Schechter on latest moves by the Manhattan District Attorney.
Alvin Bragg has already started presenting evidence, placing Mangione at the scene of the crime to a grand jury. There's a lot of momentum here.
A Southwest Florida sheriff's deputy has been shot and killed during a traffic stop. CBS's Peter King has details from Orlando.
It happened in Charlotte Harbor, north of Fort Myers on Florida's Gulf Coast.
He was a good family man. He loved his children, and he was a really great cop.
Charlotte County Sheriff Bill Promell says Corporal Elio Diaz had stopped the driver who then shot and killed him. He says deputies caught the shooter a few miles away, shooting and killing him after he reached for his rifle.
The San Francisco Bay Area is recovering from a weekend of wild weather that included the city's first ever tornado warning.
Pretty crazy. It picked up cars.
At least 7 cars were flipped over and 5 people were injured. Many residents want to know why they did not receive a tornado warning. Carlisa Rogacheski with the National Weather Service explains the steep terrain of the Santa Cruz Mountains affected their radar.
It caused a quick spin-up tornado, which is pretty hard to see.
Matt Bigler for CBS News, San Francisco.
Researchers at the University of Miami have found buildings along the city's coast are sinking. Senior study author Fak Amalung.
When a high-rise is newly constructed, they settle, but that is supposed to be over relatively soon. But we see that it continues for quite a long time afterwards.
He says some have sunk as much as 3 inches over the past 7 years. Dow's up 30. This is CBS News. Popular dog names are changing.
So long, Max. According to the pet sitting site Rover, the longtime favorite of male dog names has been bumped down to number 2 on the list of the most popular pet names for 2024.
Charlie's at the very top, and for our female dogs, Luna, followed by Bella. For many years, Bella was number 1, but I guess Bella's moved down too.
Professional dog trainer Nicole Ellis says Milo tops the names for male cats, while for female felines like dogs, it's Luna, followed by Lily. Stephen Kaufman, CBS News.
Numbers from the Census Bureau show seniors on the move are moving to Myrtle Beach faster than anywhere else in the country. Wall Street Journal's crunched the numbers. They show the U.S. fastest growing population of people 65 and up. 23% of them are putting down stakes in the 60-mile stretch of South Carolina's Atlantic coast. Journal cites the weather, location, plus lots of dining and shopping. Deborah Rodriguez, CBS News.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, good Monday morning from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio in New York City to our worldwide audience. We're also streaming the video live on YouTube, so you can head over to youtube.com, search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's where you'll find us coming up. We're going to check in with Ross Matheson, Bloomberg News Director for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Get some latest news coming out of Germany. Might get a no-confidence vote coming out of Germany. It's kind of one of the last places you'd expect to see that. Phil Orlando, Chief Equity Market Strategist, Head of Client Portfolio at Federated Hermes, give us his market call. And here's a story that popped up on my radar big time. Suzanne Woolley, Bloomberg personal finance reporter, on the big take story today entitled Need to Grind. Retirement Crunch Haunts Americans Nearing 60, which goes to my strategy. I'm never stop working.
Right, but yeah.
But I know a lot of people are thinking about retirement, and they're like, I might not have enough money here.
Oh my God, I assume I'm not going to have enough money. Like, that's my base case at this point.
Yeah, so that'll be good. I'm asking for a friend, but I'm going to be, again, the last job, greeter at Walmart for me.
Yeah,
I'm going to be that guy.
But you may like that in a weird way.
I may.
So that's a difference.
That may happen. So I'll be there on Route 70 in Brick, New Jersey.
I will come see
Let's kick this whole thing off with Lisa Mateo and get a Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa, what happened?
To see that too. Good morning. Well, this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Trade over 10,000 U.S. stocks and ETFs, U.S. equity index options, U.S. Treasuries, and more on your timetable. Learn more at ibkr.com/around the clock. All right, we've got a lift to the markets. This is ahead of more economic data out this week surrounding a Fed decision on Wednesday. That includes retail sales out tomorrow, core PCE Friday. This morning, we learned a measure of New York State factory activity that retreated by the most since May of 2023. Also, S&P Global Manufacturing PMI. The survey was for 49.5. It came in a tick lower, 48.3. That's still lower, though, than the prior at 49.7. Then you have S&P Global U.S. Services PMI at 58.5. That was higher than the survey, also higher than the prior. We'll get to the NASDAQ, up about 0.5%, 101 points. The Dow up 0.2%, 118 points. The S&P 500 up 0.3%, or 20 points. The two-year yield, 4.23%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.38%, and that's down about 1 basis point. Bitcoin hit a fresh record, topping 106,000. It's now just over 105,000. A big part of that, optimism about MicroStrategy's inclusion in the NASDAQ 100. The company also bought an additional $1.5 billion of the cryptocurrency through the sale of stock. Shares of MicroStrategy, they're up about 3%. Meanwhile, Super Microcomputer, they're going to drop out of the NASDAQ 100. Their shares are down about 4%. Quick look at a few crypto-linked stocks. We have Coinbase up about 4%, Mara Holdings up 7%, and online brokerage, have to point out Robinhood, up to about 3%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right, thanks so much, Lisa Mateo. Alex Steele here, alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. Here's a fun stat for you. Every day in December has seen negative S&P 500 breadth. Every single day, right, in terms of not broadening out, in terms of only a few stocks really leading it. That's not usually a good sign, particularly when you're supposed to be having a Santa Claus rally. So we want to get more into the details, look at some individual stocks. For that, we go to Bailey Lipschultz, Bloomberg Senior Equities Reporter. So interesting, because like individually you can see some stocks move, like Honeywell, MicroStrategy, but like on the whole, breadth has been terrible.
It's really been, to your point, it's been kind of this tale since Thanksgiving, is that people are buying some names. We saw Broadcom's up big again today. Big earnings, big rally. We're seeing the chip space getting a lift. But broadly speaking, even if you look at the headline, S&P 500 right now up 0.3%, you're at least seeing some volume ahead of kind of what is the last real trading week before everyone kind of closes down shop next week and the week after. But as you mentioned, Honeywell outperforming this morning, ticker HON up 3%. This coming after kind of admitting that they're going to be kicking the tires on what they're doing with their aerospace unit. This coming after Elliott took a stake and really was pushing for them to separate it, kind of looking forward to what that could mean. The big question is it a spin out? What does the streamlined Honeywell actually look like? This is a stock trading right near its all-time highs. And if you look at other kind of bigger companies that separated their aerospace unit, GE is now GE Aerospace. GE Healthcare got spun out of that, as did GE Vernova, their renewable energy space. So it seems like we're in kind of that banking period, Paul, where you break up the big conglomerates, collect some fees, and kind of do it again.
5 years later, I'm going to put them right back
together.
And Honeywell's been holding on to not doing that for a very long time.
Yeah.
So any sort of real significant move would be staggering.
But that's kind of with aerospace. They're an interesting company because they are kind of a serial acquirer and spin-out company. So when you talk to some of the consultants of the world, they point to Honeywell for examples of good and bad deals, just in terms of trying to streamline the business and whether or not you're saddling the spin-out company with debt or whether that's being kind of put onto the RemainCo. But when you look at Honeywell right now, trading at $235 a share, again, back near those all-time highs, but you're almost unchanged relative to 2021.
And the MicroStrategy, it's like a twofer. It's like a Bitcoin rally and it's a NASDAQ 100 inclusion rally.
Exactly, and you're seeing this play out again. Friday evening was announced that MicroStrategy will be added to the NASDAQ 100, and we get this company reporting every Monday how much they've spent on using shares and convertible debt to buy Bitcoin. They unveiled about a month and a half ago, plans to sell converts and ATM, so shares through an at-the-market offering, for $42 billion. They've already sold $13.35 billion worth of shares at the market, which is essentially you call up your bankers, they print out shares, and they sell it in the market, and you take the proceeds. And they're doing that and kind of positioning that real cash and buying Bitcoin. Again,
and this company's going into what index?
NASDAQ 100.
Really?
Really?
It's basically just a leverage play on ETFs.
It is a leverage play. So it's such an interesting debate because it's a $101 billion market cap company.
Yeah,
it owns about $45 billion worth of Bitcoin. And when you talk to the bears, to your point, Paul, their underlying software business loses money. They're not kind of a real quote-unquote business. But when you talk to some of the bullish investors and analysts, well, if you have a mandate and you want to have exposure to Bitcoin, but you can't buy the token, you can't buy the ETF, well, this at least lets you have a kind of play on that.
Well, also, and with the inclusion, it's like a series of like markers that you have to hit, right? Like it's really technical when that happens. So the fundamentals in some way may not matter as much. Real quick, Supermicro.
Getting the boot from the NASDAQ 100, the other side of what that means. Also, though, we did have a Bloomberg scoop on Friday that they are set to tap Evercore to help raise capital. This is a company that had drawn the wrath of short sellers, and most notably Hindenburg, and had their own internal accounting issues, fired their auditor. So a lot going on, been a fascinating story, but they will no longer be at the NASDAQ 100. MicroStrategy, one of the companies that will be taking their place.
All right, thanks so much, Bailey. Really appreciate it. Bailey Lipschultz joining us, Bloomberg Senior Equities Reporter. I want to go over to Europe now because something very fascinating is happening in Germany. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz will be submitting to a parliamentary vote of confidence today, which apparently he intends to lose, which will then trigger a snap election on February 23rd. Joining us now is Roz Matheson, Bloomberg News Director for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Roz, why is he doing this?
Well, he was forced to in a way because his government collapsed. His coalition was quite tenuous. They kept fighting over the budget. There's a tension over what's known as the budget break, which is the ability to spend above a certain level in Germany. And so his government collapsed. And without a majority, he really had no choice but to move towards an election. And this is a technical step. You have to have a confidence vote. You lose that vote, and then you can go and request permission to have an election. So it really is a pro forma move that we're seeing today. But it's interesting, you actually have to have a confidence vote. You have to make sure you lose that vote, and then you can call the election. So basically, it's a technical step towards this vote that he really had to have because he no longer has the majority that he needs.
Roz, can you summarize for us the forces that brought us here? I mean, I know, I guess the bear case for Germany is, boy, I lost my source of cheap gas. I lost, to some degree, my biggest customer for some of my industrial goods. Is it primarily an economic issue?
It really is a story of long-term stagnation in Germany, and it didn't really just begin with Olaf Scholz. It's been the case for Germany for quite some years, is how do you take an engine of growth for Europe for a long time that's relied heavily on manufacturing, and how do you make it fit for purpose? in a modern world when manufacturing may no longer compete. I mean, just look at the car sector in Germany is a prime example of how Germany's struggled to adapt to modern economies. And so really long-term stagnation, cost of living, not great. Obviously the gas question over the war in Ukraine, fundamental questions about direction. And so, people are tired of the infighting in the coalition. It was tenuous, as I said, and now they're fighting over spending more and busting those budget norms. And so really just collapsed in a heap on the back of that.
Well, that's kind of my point, is that all of this really boils down to Germany needs to spend more money. And the debt cap that Angela Merkel put under, which may have made sense back then, is what's really eventually hurting the country right now. No matter what happens with Olaf Scholz, any hope that debt cap will be removed and they can spend more?
Well, that's the question, because it doesn't necessarily seem that it will. I mean, the Friedrich Merz, who's polling first at the moment with his party, his coalition, he seems to be at the moment the leader and the front runner in this election. He's a small government guy. I mean, he doesn't really favor lots of spending. He also favors lower taxes but lower regulations. So he's just kind of a small government politician, and that's not really an environment to push to spend heavily and bust those budget norms. And so we're not necessarily heading towards what you call very bold economic measures in Germany. I mean, Olaf Scholz, you could hear him in his presentation to Parliament today as this confidence vote is gearing up, saying we have to be ready to spend more. There's obviously a lot of spending that's coming for defense in Germany, fundamental increases there. Where does all this money come from is the question. But it doesn't seem as though necessarily the possible next chancellor would be inclined to go that way either.
All right, Ross, thank you so much for your reporting. Really appreciate it. Ross Matheson, she's the news director for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa at Bloomberg News, joining us via Zoom from London here. And I guess we may get some headlines this morning coming out of Germany regarding that no confidence vote. And then presumably another election will be coming up.
There was a great article. Well, the big take, I think, is on this, and they had some really great detail in it. And one is that the country's decline in national competitiveness means every household is worse off by about 2,500 euros a year. And that the gradual decay, because it didn't happen overnight, right? But it's gradual, has removed any urgency that you might feel otherwise. But that's like a staggering statistic from that Bloomberg big take.
It is, and particularly when you understand that Germany is the biggest economy in the European Union, and if Germany's not working, it really calls into question that whole part of the world there. And we're not talking about Italy or Spain; we're talking about Germany here. So. Really
I know Italy and Spain are doing just fine. It's Germany and France. They're on the struggle bus.
And they're going to get my tourist dollars next year.
Italy, yeah. So Paul booked his
getting
vacay.
ready for that. Yeah.
Nice. All right, coming up, Phil Orlando, Chief Equity Market Strategist, will be joining us for his take on the market. Well, what do you do into 2025? This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got stocks mixed, and this is as we await this week's interest rate decision from the Federal Reserve. Now, Goldman Sachs economists, they say they expect a 25 basis point reduction from the Fed this week, followed by a pause in January. We're in records watch, so let's get right to it. We'll start with the S&P 500 up about 0.1%, 8 points at 6,059. The Dow, a little change, down 13 points at 43,813. The Nasdaq down 0.3%, 61 points at 19,988. We have the 2-year yield at 4.23%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.39%, and that is little changed. To commodities, we have oil slipping. We have Brent crude, $74 a barrel. Spot gold on the rise, $2,652 an ounce. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little change. We have the Japanese yen weaker, euro weaker, British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin above 106,000. Few stocks on the move. Drone tech company Red Cat. It's up 13%. It announced a strategic partnership with Palantir Technologies. Palantir, though, down about 5%. And shares of Honeywell, they're up more than 2%. That's after saying it's considering strategic options, and that includes a possible separation of its aerospace business. And finally, shares of Ford down 3% after Jefferies turns bearish on the automaker. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now. Wherever you get your podcasts, I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right, thanks so much, Lisa Mateo. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies in 130 industries worldwide. What do you do if breadth is not great? We're headed into the Fed. We should be in a Santa Claus rally, but it's only being led by a handful of stocks. What does that mean then for your portfolio for next year? Phil Orlando, one of the best out there, Chief Equity Market Strategist and Head of Client Portfolio Management at Federated Hermes, is joining us. Hey, Phil, what do you make of this every day in December? There's been weak breadth in a month that's supposed to be relatively positive with a Santa Claus rally for most assets. What do you think of that?
First of all, good morning, Alex. Thank you very much for having me back on the program. Let's not discount the fact that since the first week or so in August, the S&P 500 is up 19%. So what you would normally have expected, during the month of December, Santa Claus rally, and on top of that, a post-election rally. Normally, the stock market, November and December post-election, is up about 5 to 10%. We got a tremendous amount of that in August and September and October, which historically are sort of choppy months. So I wouldn't lose a lot of sleep over it. Our full-year target for this year is 6,200. We're at 6,100 and change. So I think we've done okay. The market's doing fine.
So 2025, Phil, what are the drivers of this market? Is it the Fed? Is it good old-fashioned earnings? What do you think is going to move this market one way or the other in 25?
The short answer is yes, Paul.
Okay.
So our S&P 500 target for next year is 7,000. So we're going to go from 6,200, we think, to 7,000. What will largely drive that is continued improvement in economic growth and corporate earnings growth. The stock market will continue to grind higher. And with the change in administration, we believe that we are likely to see a reduction in regulations, perhaps later in the year, an extension and a making permanence of the corporate and individual tax rates. All of that is boosting animal spirits right now. Business and consumer confidence are soaring, and we think that's going to continue to drive strong economic growth, strong corporate earnings growth, and ultimately the stock market is going to reflect that improvement in earnings.
Many strategists are coming out and saying something similar, but that it's really going to be in the growth trade, and that you really need to see stronger earnings and stronger economic data for the value trade to take over. What do you think?
Well, the growth trade has had a pretty good couple of years. I mean, driven largely by the Mag 7s. You've got some terrific companies there. I'm not going to argue against that. But the reality is that we do expect that this rally to broaden out. the valuation imbalance, if you will, with the Mag 7s, we think there's going to be a reversion to the mean that to some degree has started in the back half of this year. We think that continues over the course of next year. And we play significant catch up with the small caps, both growth and value, and the large cap value. And we think that the large cap growth, continues to do well because they're growing fine. I'll throw one additional wrinkle into this. We think that the surprise next year might be how well emerging markets do. China's been, flat on its back for the better part of the last couple of years. We think that they're starting to get the memo in terms of we need some aggressive fiscal and monetary policy stimulus to get their economies and their financial markets going. Valuation's extraordinarily attractive. And from a stock market standpoint, we think EM ought to be a pretty good performer next year as well.
Hey, Phil, did your outlook and the outlook of your colleagues at Federated, did it change materially the day after the presidential election?
The short answer is no, because, we had forecast that Trump would win, that he would run the table with the 7 key swing states, that the Senate would flip to Republican control regardless of who won the election, and the down ballot impact on the House. Whoever won the presidency was likely to win the House. So that suggested that we thought that there would be a red wave, and we positioned for that ahead of time. So, we've had a pretty good year in terms of performance, and the confluence of politics and economics and the financial markets have all sort of come together beautifully for us this year.
Phil, when you look at your target for next year, does the sequencing of Trump's agenda matter in terms of how you position, in terms of, say, immigration, tax cuts, tariffs, deregulation?
So our expectation is that we're likely to get immigration and tariff stuff early, let's say the first half of this year. We think that the tax stuff, the extension of the individual and corporate rates is likely to be a post-Labor Day kind of an event. And then we think right at the back end of the year, about this time next year, we're likely to get some news on Trump's ideas about the transition of the leadership of the Federal Reserve. That Powell's term as the chairman of the Fed will expire in May of 26. So it would be completely appropriate for the president to announce that he's either going to recommit for a third term for Powell or go to another candidate, such as Kevin Warsh, for example, right around Christmas of 25.
All right, Phil, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Phil Orlando, he's a chief equity market strategist and head of the client portfolio management team at Federated Hermes, joining us from NYC. Again, we're awaiting news coming out of Germany. Just about we're having a no confidence vote coming up, and I guess the way it works, from my understanding and from the reporting, Alex, is we get the no confidence vote. That presumably that will happen any moment now. Then that will then precipitate elections. But it's unknown after that. I'm not sure where we go from there.
Yeah, and also, does it actually change the issue? And I urge everyone to go ahead and read the Bloomberg Big Take today. Yeah. It's really good. Yana Randau, Martin Admemer, Bloomberg Economics have a great piece, and they sort of go through the issues, saying that Germany's economy is declining and is now 5% smaller than it would have been if the pre-pandemic growth trend had been maintained. That's from Bloomberg Economics. And plus, as I mentioned earlier, the country's decline in national competitiveness means every household is worse off by 2,500 euros, and that there's been a gradual decay, so there's a limited sense of urgency, and that Germany's growth potential has narrowed to just 0.4%. And the solution is to spend more money, but you can't do that when you wind up having a low debt cap. Basically, it's a low debt ratio, and it's capped, and it was capped under Angela Merkel's term as chancellor, but nonetheless, it feels urgent.
Yep.
But is it on the ground, and can they do anything effective about it, regardless of who's the chancellor?
No, and it seems like, again, in this Big Take reporting here today, there's a feeling in Germany that there's this grinding move lower. There's not one big precipitating event that might rally everybody to say, all right, we need change. We might need some radical change. It's just this grind lower. And you think about some of the industries. When I think about Germany, I think about industry, making big stuff, turbine engines or automobiles or tractors and things like that, and selling them abroad. And their biggest client, or one of their biggest clients, being Germany. Customers, and we know the slower economy there is, putting a real issue there. And then this whole move to electric vehicles has proven to be really, really difficult for all automakers globally. And of course, that's a bigger part of their economy than it is, say, the U.S.
And reading this big take also, it was interesting that they talked to smaller companies and that a lot of them aren't even going to be replacing equipment that breaks. As in, like, there's just so little growth potential, and the list of problems just get longer and longer. All right, here we go. Here's the headline. German parliament clears the way for early election in February. So then it does imply that Olaf Scholz did lose the snap election and did lose the vote of no confidence, and then we'll have the snap election in late February. So to that point, expenditures on machinery, for example, are more than 9% below pre-pandemic levels, and it's those family-owned companies that's saying they're not even planning to replace what breaks, and they're blaming bureaucracy and unpredictable policies. I mean, yikes, that's a tough one.
It really is. And then again, just looking at some reporting from Bloomberg and just, saying, like, Germany, in many parts of the world, Germany's politics has shifted to the right, and it is fragmented. So getting a coalition government together, perhaps even more difficult than in past times. And we're seeing something similar in France as well, with their left and right. It kind of makes what we do here seem a little bit more, a little better than maybe we sometimes think.
All right, Oliver Crook joins us now, a Bloomberg Europe correspondent, for more on this. Again, that headline is German Parliament clears the way for the early election in February. All right, Oliver, give us the details.
Quite a day for Olaf Scholz before the parliament. This all began basically at 1 p.m. Local time here with a 25-minute speech by Olaf Scholz, where he was really sort of putting out his sort of stakes in terms of what he would like to do with another term as chancellor. Then a 2-hour debate by all the lawmakers in the Bundestag. This is a pretty spirited, I would say, campaign event, and a campaign, generally speaking, by German standards. It's been fairly personal. It's been quite vicious at points. I mean, Olaf Scholz was talking about the FDP, that is the party that had the finance ministry. He fired his finance minister because of disagreements over the budget. He's saying that basically they're morally unfit to govern. Merz, for his part, the head of the CDU, Angela Merkel's traditional party, said that, Scholz is a failed chancellor. And then on the other side of things, on the far right, you have the Alternative for Deutschland, the far-right group that has 20% of the vote going into this election, saying that basically Germany is on the brink of collapse, and a vote for Friedrich Merz and the CDU is a vote for war with Russia. So that's some of the flavor of what we had today. And after that, we had these lawmakers going forward and putting forward and voting against Olaf Scholz's government, as it turns out in the end. And this is the last step to basically Olaf Scholz to go to the president of Germany to basically dissolve the government and basically pave the way for that election that is slated for February the 23rd.
All right, let's fast forward to February 23rd. Is there any expectation of how this may go? Talk to us about what are some of the options for the German people?
Yeah, so what you have right now is the CDU, the conservative center-right party of Germany that is basically leading the polls really since the beginning, and for a couple of years now. They have about 31% of the vote. What is interesting and what makes this election quite a bit different from ones in the past is that you have the Alternative for Deutschland, again, the really quite far-right party in Germany, with number 2 spot with 20%, basically a fifth of the German vote. That has not happened in really post-war Germany at all. So that is sort of one of the sort of clear issues there. And the thing is that nobody will work with them, basically. No coalition is possible with the AfD. This has been made clear even by, the conservative parties within Germany. They just won't basically touch it. Then Olaf Scholz has been closing the gap a little bit on third place, and that basically sets us off for a grand coalition, CDU, SPD. This is something that has happened a lot in history. Merkel, had this arrangement. In fact, Olaf Scholz was the finance minister under Merkel, under that coalition. The issue that brings is that may bring some of the same problems that we had with this government, which is massive disagreements on how to spend money at a time when the German economy is really limping. There is zero growth, and as a consequence, as we're learning in France as well, when you have zero growth, you don't have as much money to play with. You have budgets that bring down the government.
here's my totally unfair question to you, Oliver. I'm just wondering, in what capacity in Europe has snap elections ever worked? I'm like genuinely trying to think back, and it seems like a lot of times the individual in power thinks that it will help cement a mandate at some point, and that's why this sort of eventually evolves. But it never seems to work.
Well, so listen, that's what makes it, that's the sort of distinction between the German snap election and the French one, right? The German one is basically forced because they basically fired one part of their coalition government and basically kicked them out of government and no longer had a mandate to govern. So they just basically had to do it. This is not going to go well for Olaf Scholz. That is clear. The Macron one was a bit more of a wild card, really a kind of, really a skydive into sort of political uncertainty, and it really, I think, seen by most as a real miscalculation because it did not go at all his way, and we're seeing the sort of the consequences of that. To say when it has worked, I mean, only because I was reading about this today. If we have to go back to the 1970s, I can give you an example of Willy Brandt in the sort of west of Germany. So that was one to sort of consolidate some power. But yeah, I have to say the last few, certainly this year, have not really gone that way for these leaders.
And Oliver, you were mentioning about the AfD, the far-right party, now roughly 20% of the votes. I'm not sure you can ignore them anymore. I mean, how can a coalition government ignore 1 in 5 voters?
Well, this is a very interesting part of the debate, and I think it's something that we've seen across the political spectrum in a number of different countries. I mean, arguably, you've had this happen in Italy. You have Giorgia Meloni, who was once really considered a sort of pariah, the sort of brothers of Italy. She is now Prime Minister of Italy, and in some ways the European leader with the most powerful mandate in all of Europe. You're seeing the same thing happening in France with Marine Le Pen, who, for a very long time was basically totally ignored by the political establishment in France, and that is no longer an option. The question is, when does that come to Germany? Of course, the issue with Germany is that comes fraught and laden with much more political charged issues from the past, and basically with the far right and the sort of history of fascism that has occurred in Germany. This is a very sensitive topic for the Germans and for many people in Germany, which is why you see a lot of protesting in the streets against this party. But again, increasingly something that just cannot be ignored.
And my real question is, does any outcome lead the German government to spend more money, period? Because that's the only thing that's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, and the answer, no likely outcome will basically lead to that, because there was some debate about this going into the election that we were seeing from the CDU, the center-right party, basically saying that they were maybe going to think about, releasing the debt break. There would be some conditions, but we actually saw a copy of their early draft of their platform, which they haven't yet released, that says that basically, the debt of today is the tax of tomorrow. We are not going to touch the debt break. And this is the fundamental point here in Germany, right? What is the point, and this is what many critics think, of having really, really low borrowing costs if you don't borrow any money when you're in a crisis situation? And what is interesting is that Angela Merkel has actually just released her memoir, and she is the one who actually brought in the debt break in 2009. And just to remind people, this is part of the Constitution. This is not just a law. This takes 2/3 of the parliament to change the debt break. She is advocating now that they do something about the debt break and that they change it. So this is going to be at the very center of things, but at the moment, not looking like it's going to change.
Is there any expectation that there could be a challenge to this change in power, that there may be some, I don't know, just something around this election that could get even worse here for the German people?
I mean, I think that the problem with this election and this sort of, again, another coalition government and a bit of disagreement is that it's just basically not going to solve Germany's fundamental problems. And I think that even when you look at the platforms of what a lot of these politicians are offering, the business community that I speak to, the lobby groups that I speak to, is basically, everyone seems to be coming to the sick man of Europe with cyclical medicines. What we have is a structural illness, right? There are problems with the energy sector, there are problems with labor costs, and there's a problem with a business model that was basically very export-oriented, where you have all of your inputs that are much more expensive in Germany, also at a time when you have just much less globalization and everyone turning inwards, and you're competing against the United States with the Inflation Reduction Act, you're competing with China with huge amounts of state support, and the Germans are just not seemingly sort of realizing the situation. You can cut tax, you can cut bureaucracy, that will help, but the question will still remain, what is going to drive growth in Germany? They don't have a sprawling tech sector, they have huge amounts of engineering sort of prowess, but they really need to get this economy moving, and that is the sort of big problem for politicians here. Really don't have an answer to that question.
I'm going to steal that from you. So it's structural issues, but everything has a cyclical solution. I'm going to totally paraphrase that and steal it. But before I let you go, Do the investors that you speak to feel like this situation is adequately reflected in the stock market and the bond market?
Well, this is what's interesting, right? The sort of guarantee in the bond market is the fact that basically Germany has very, very little debt, and that's not going to change anytime soon, right? So that is sort of puts a cap, and that sort of keeps the vigilantes sort of away from the bond market, and everything's sort of more or less tidy there, right? In terms of the stock market, I mean, we have been hitting sort of all-time highs on the DAX, this year periodically, which again is a little bit confounding. I mean, part of that story is that Rheinmetall, the biggest defense company in Europe, is listed in Germany, and they've had like a almost 600% rally since the war in Ukraine. So you do have some bright spots. Actually, sort of interesting conversation I had last week with the CEO of a defense company, Hensoldt. So they make sort of satellites and sensors, sensors and radars. They are actually taking a lot of workers that are being laid off from the auto sector and incorporating full teams from the auto sector, moving from auto to defense. So that is sort of an interesting silver lining, though admittedly a very thin silver lining, because the auto industry is worth just hundreds of thousands of jobs in this country. Wow. But some of the way that the sort of job market is evolving in Germany.
All right, Oliver, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Oliver Crook, Bloomberg News, giving us the latest on Germany. Again, a no vote has taken place today, and then they are now setting elections for February. So we will stay on top of that with continued reporting. One of the more widely read stories on the Bloomberg terminal today it's entitled "The Need to Grind: Retirement Crunch Haunts Americans Nearing 60." Oh, let's go to Lisa Mateo. We'll go to Lisa Mateo because I want to get to this story because
he's really excited about it.
I'm all in on this. It's what I've been preaching to my kids. All right, Lisa Mateo, let's get a Bloomberg Business Flash. Thanks.
Can't wait for that one. Good morning. Yeah, stocks right now, they are climbing, and this is as traders gear up for interest rate decisions. Major central banks across the globe later this week. We have Wednesday, the Fed decision. Swap traders now pricing in around 3/4 point rate cuts by the Fed over the next 12 months. Now, that will be followed by policy announcements in Japan, the Nordics, and the UK over the following day. Let's go over to the S&P 500. Right now, up 0.4%, 24 points at 6,075. The S&P 500 risen 27% so far in 2024. We have the Dow up 0.1%, 78 points, 43,904. The Nasdaq up 0.7%, 149 points at 20,076. The 2-year yield 4.23%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.38%, and that's down about 1 basis point. To commodities, we have Brent crude down about 0.5%, $74 a barrel. We have spot gold higher at $2,656 an ounce. To currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little changed. The Japanese yen down about 0.4%. The euro stronger, the British pound stronger. We have Bitcoin just topping 106,000. Companies making news, that's Starbucks boosting its paid parental leave for in-store workers from 6 weeks to 18 weeks for birth parents at 100% of their pay. A parent who doesn't give birth will get 12 weeks. And then sources say SoftBank CEO Masayoshi Son set to announce a plan to invest $100 billion in the U.S. over the next 4 years. And finally, Broadcom, building on Friday's gain of 24%. Its shares are up 6.5%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now. Wherever you get your podcasts, I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio and streaming live on YouTube as well. So head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcast. Suzanne Woolley joins us here. She's got a story that's getting a lot of readership on the Bloomberg terminal. She is a personal finance reporter for Bloomberg News, joining us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker studio. Need to grind. Retirement crunch haunts Americans nearing 60. So we get some of these Gen X folks starting to think about retirement, and they're looking at their 401k, and they're like, I'm not sure this is going to cover it. So what did your reporting find?
Yeah, there's a lot of stress about it because, as the oldest Xers become 60, I mean, they were sort of the guinea pigs for 401ks. The boomers had pensions, and the 401k on top of that. And now the Xers are sort of looking at their balances and looking at the news about maybe Social Security having to be reformed within the next decade, and looking at the money that they're spending supporting their adult children and possibly also their parents, aging parents. And it's just leading to a lot of concern about how the heck are you going to be able to retire in comfort anytime soon?
Right. So I was struck by it. Was it 43% say they can't afford to retire at 65? That is staggering.
It is staggering. It's just a combination of a lot of things. I mean, housing affordability has been an issue. You know, the high cost of living is an issue. These are sort of the peak earning years for a lot of Xers, and they're hit with the pandemic, which a lot of them say was a big blow to their savings. You know, and then just the cost of groceries, the cost of housing, everything has been going up and up and up, and it's harder to save, and it's harder to see, you know, how you eke more out of an already stretched budget to put away more for retirement. So,
is the expectation that since we're living longer, we're just going to have to work longer?
I think that's part of it, yes, because Xers are obviously going to live longer. You know, the truth is really that a lot of people, at least boomers, have a lot of challenges when they retire. You know, they feel sort of rootless. So in a way, maybe it's not so bad if we can work longer. There's this epidemic of loneliness in America. It gives people a sense of purpose. But the fact is, you want to have the option to retire when you want to.
Or to work differently, right? So maybe you're
Exactly.
working part-time, or maybe you're working at a job that you work maybe 8 hours a day versus like 14 hours, you know, like it's a different kind of environment and pace. Like Paul wants to be a Walmart greeter in his third career. Like, I'm not entirely kidding about that, but we don't support that part.
No. I mean, but that is, you know, that is sort of the reality. You know, in your later years, you may not want to grind away at the same job you've been doing for, you know, the past couple of decades, but you might do consulting in your area.
Sure.
Or, you know, at least you'll make some money later in life. It's not just like you'll turn the switch at 62 or 65 and then all income coming into you is over. But I mean, Social Security makes people a lot nervous because that's something, it's sort of the one thing in our society we can sort of depend on. And something's going to have to happen.
What is the feeling in with your reporting here about Social Security? I mean, I'm not.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good, Paul. People are really not feeling that Social Security is going to be there for them in the way they need it. And, you know, unsurprisingly, they place a lot of blame on that in politicians.
I mean, I'm Gen X, and I'm assuming I'm not getting Social Security. If I do, that's super, like benefit, go me, but that would be like extra stuff. So like my whole life is revolved around how do I put my money in a way that will make me money later in some kind of tax-free way, because that I've seen with my parents how difficult it is to pay taxes when you don't have any income except for like a pension or Social Security.
Yes, and for most people, you know, 85% of the Social Security benefits are taxed, which is
bananas.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's just my personal feeling.
Yes. I like that formal assessment there. Bananas.
Yeah. So what's the solution? We have about 30 seconds left.
For your solution.
Oh my gosh. The solution. I mean, there are a lot of ways you can sort of, I mean, obviously you can, if you're over 50, you can contribute more to your 401k. You can contribute an extra $7,500 a year if you have it this coming year. There are ways to, you know, increase your savings. There are, you know, side hustles. It's really hard to come up with an answer to that question because it's different for every person, you know, what they can do. I guess just like smarter savings and making sure you're doing everything you can to optimize your tax advantage savings of your 401k, and maybe, I mean, Roths are something I think younger people should really look into.
Yeah.
Because that's, you put in the money after tax and you don't have to pay taxes at retirement.
All right, Suzanne, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Suzanne Woolley, Bloomberg personal finance reporter. All right, coming up, Andrew Silverman over at Bloomberg Intelligence will be joining us. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. Well, the Trump trade has many facets. One of them is an expectation that mergers and acquisition activity is going to really pick up in 2025 for a variety of reasons, regulatory, financing, and other reasons. So that's got folks on Wall Street feeling pretty good about it. And we got some research on that. Andrew Silverman joins us from Bloomberg Intelligence. Andrew, what did you find kind of when you looked at some of the data, right after the election? What's the expectation out there?
So it's actually really interesting. For the past year, we've seen basically the same pattern month after month. We've had tech companies being acquired. That's sort of like the leading target tech companies. And then we have financial companies, and then normally in the third place we see traditional energy companies, right? But in November we saw this really interesting development. We saw a big spike in basic materials companies being acquired, and we also saw this increase in telecom companies being acquired, and we saw an increase in media companies, obviously, earlier in December. And I think that companies are positioning themselves after they saw what happened in the election, trying to proactively protect themselves for what might come in a Trump presidency.
Do we think that these will be transformative monster deals? Or are we talking like small bolt-ons?
Oh yeah, these are big deals.
Okay.
Like OneOak, for example, it's an $8.7 billion deal for Enlink. Now that's a traditional energy deal. It's sort of it's interesting. Companies are coming up with different sorts of conclusions about what's going to happen in the Trump presidency. We see these sort of traditional energy companies still doing these big acquisitions, but then BlackRock did an acquisition of HPS investment company, and that company is a big credit investor in clean energy. Obviously, they think that either the Republicans aren't going to be as hard on clean energy companies as people might think, or maybe even they're going to be good for clean energy companies. Obviously, if he puts tariffs on foreign investment in the United States, then clean energy is a place where we might see a lot of it, because a lot of the batteries and a lot of the solar cells and the even the minerals that we use in our batteries are coming from China. So if we put a 60% tariff on China, not so great for clean energy.
Yeah, another reason to maybe get some deals done now before the tariffs kind of muddy up the situation, perhaps. I remember just last week, Paul Taubman, one of the leading M&A bankers on Wall Street, formerly at Morgan Stanley, now as he has his own firm, he's out there saying they're hiring investment bankers now in anticipation of deal activity really picking up. One of the areas I think should be better is just the regulatory environment. It seems every time over the last 3, 4, 5 years that we saw a deal announced, big deals, the Federal Trade Commission would have a problem. The Department of Justice would have a problem. Now I think the expectation is that's going to ease up a little bit. Is that what you're hearing out there?
Well, certainly with Lena Khan gone, I think that's the single most important factor.
Because she's head of the FTC, right?
Right, FTC,
okay,
exactly.
And very tough on consolidation.
Yeah, actually, Jen Rhee and I have done some research on this, and we think that the perception is that it's going to be a much better environment for M&A, but not so fast, because there's also that strong populist stream to the Trump administration. In fact, his vice president, J.D. Vance, is a big fan of sort of some of these progressive pieces of legislation that are trying to make, S&P 500 companies taxable when they do reorganization. So it's possible that even though people are very sort of optimistic about what the environment is going to be without Alina Khan, for example, it may not be as spectacular as they think.
Well, that's when I think it sort of gets to sector by sector, right? Because to your point about the populism, that's a TBD then, and what it means for like Meta, Google, Microsoft, right? In terms of them getting bigger.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. So, tech companies could very well be still under the microscope in a Trump administration.
Yeah. Are there any sectors that you guys in your work feel like will have more runway?
Yeah. I mean, we continue to see a growth in basic materials and telecom and media in December as well. So that pivot that companies did in November continues in December, and we expect to see even growth in sectors we haven't seen a whole lot of growth in for months and months, like consumer staples and discretionary as well.
All right. Appreciate it, Andrew. Really appreciate it. Andrew Silverman, Senior Policy Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, out with some research saying that, hey, you thought we were going to get some good M&A in a Republican administration. The numbers actually prove it out, just even starting as early as the month of November. So maybe the M&A bankers will have a good year. I think they had a pretty good year this year, but I think next year could be even.
I know, but
very
then
good.
are we getting ahead of ourselves here? Like, of course, like everyone's going to talk their book and say how great M&A is.
True,
gonna be.
yes.
So let's
Yeah.
you got to show it to believe it, I guess.
Yep,
on that
absolutely.
end.
Coming up in just moments, President-elect Donald Trump, he has a press statement from Mar-a-Lago that 11 a.m. Wall Street time will have some comments, I believe, from Mar-a-Lago. So we'll have to see what is on the agenda for.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down the path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to build a path towards that. Almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level up your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
When I was younger, I used to be in bands. I'd play drums in bands and toured America with them. Did a lot of session drumming, recorded albums. So yeah, it was good fun doing the drumming. The only reason I stopped it, well, I still play, but not as serious as I did when I was younger. But drumming doesn't pay the bills. I was never good enough to be able to pay the bills with it, but it was good fun. I started RJF, and the reason I started it was I saw a gap in the market for particular early stage and startup businesses. With the experience that I've got of running businesses, of being a finance director at the very biggest companies in the world to being finance director of small startups, we were looking at providing more than just basic accountancy services. So yes, we'll do all that. We'll do all the basic, all the statutory side of things that you need to do. But there's so much more value that we can add, and I wanted to have my experience to help these startups, because a lot of them don't really know where to go. You can go to your high street accountants and they can do a good job compliance-wise, but you would question whether they've actually been in the fire line of a business. Have you been in a business where you're thinking, how do I pay wages next week? Or business is really successful, what do we do with it next? Or how do we grow it? How do we grow into international territories? Or how do we grow our markets? How do we expand? So a lot of the experience I've seen over the years and seen different types of business in different sectors, I thought, well, it's a real value that I can add to these businesses as opposed to just being an FD, because a lot of these businesses can't afford an FD. But if we can take care of their statutory side of things, the compliance side of things, I'm on hand to be able to help and advise businesses with their growth strategy, or if they're in difficulty, help them through these times.
I will show you how to get the best funding for your startup idea. Let's get started. Here's the deal. If you have an amazing startup idea and need funds to fuel it, we're here to help. Simply send us a video where you explain your idea. Make it clear, concise, and compelling. Hook us in with your passion and vision. Don't forget to include your contact details so investors can reach out directly. This is your chance to shine and get your idea in front of people who can make it a reality. Imagine turning your startup dream into a thriving business. It all starts with that one simple step. So what are you waiting for? Grab your phone, hit record, and let your idea fly. The future of your startup could be just one video away. Remember, be clear, be passionate, and most importantly, be you. We can't wait to see what you've got. Let's get funded now.
Explore additional strategic alternatives, including, Alex, as you mentioned, potential separation of its aerospace business. That's something that Elliott has been pushing for in terms of breaking up the company, and it's been quite a year for activists, and we've seen Elliott circling Honeywell again a little bit of a while ago, and looking at some of the things that analysts have been calling out is just basically the potential upside for breakups, some of the parts basis. I know that's right in your wheelhouse, Paul. You break them up, you merge them, you kind of slice and dice and collect some fees. So we're seeing Honeywell outperforming this morning again, ticker HON up 3.1%.
Now, apparently, the automation part of the business, though, is the one to watch, because the warehousing business is in the automation business, and the warehouse business is where things are really tough. It's an early cyclical indicator, and it's been really struggling. So I wonder if it would be a good versus bad company, and I mean bad company as in just less profitable and struggling right now.
Well, the interesting thing, if you just run the FA Go function right now, according to the Bloomberg Terminal, about $31 billion in debt. And when we look at when these companies are split up, who gets saddled with debt, to your point, which is growing. If you don't want to have the growth company saddled down with debt, maybe that ends up with kind of your slower, kind of typical blue chip nuts and bolts company gets kind of the predominant group of that.
Yeah, so definitely watch that warehouse part in the automation business. What else are you watching?
Talked about it earlier. MicroStrategy, ticker MSTR, up 4.2%. This is a stock that is up 574% year to date.
Huh, okay.
Getting added to the NASDAQ 100, automatically the second best performer, only behind AppLovin. This is a leveraged Bitcoin play, really. It sells shares and sells convertible debt to buy cryptocurrency. It announced that it bought another 15,000 Bitcoin worth $1.5 billion. So now owns $45 billion of Bitcoin and will be added to the NASDAQ 100. Very popular.
It's like an ETF almost. It's like, I kind of think of it as, I mean, it is. It's just kind of a investment pool on Bitcoin, right?
Exactly, and I think the thing is, though, if you busted out your fundamental kind of valuation, $102 billion in market value on $45 billion of Bitcoin holdings kind of becomes a, what's the future yield off of that, and are they a better kind of allocator of capital than you?
Okay, all right.
And last up?
Supermicro.
The third one. Oh, we're back. Okay.
One. Yeah, keeping it the same. I'm sorry, I'm being boring. Down 6.4%, getting the boot from the NASDAQ 100. This is a company that has had its own accounting and financial reporting issues. Ernst & Young kicked it to the curb in terms of its auditor earlier this year, was also targeted by Hindenburg, who has gone after a number of companies that fell by the wayside, most notably Nikola. So those shares, ticker SMCI, down 6.4%.
Yeah. All right, Bailey, thanks a lot. We appreciate it. Bailey Lipschultz, Bloomberg Senior Equities Reporter, joining us. We are currently still waiting for President-elect Donald Trump to make a press statement from Mar-a-Lago. We will bring you that as it happens, along with any headlines and, of course, analysis. Let's get a little bit of a preview here to see what we can expect. Wendy Benjaminson is Bloomberg Washington Senior Editor, and she joins us now. What are you expecting to hear from President-elect Donald Trump?
We are expecting the head of SoftBank to announce that he will invest $100 billion, that's with a B, in the U.S. Once Trump is president. This is part of a trend we're seeing of corporate executives currying favor with Trump. And you'll recall that last week, Trump said that anyone who invests $1 billion in the United States, just $1 billion, would get speedy permitting. That he would speed up the permitting process, especially for environmental rules, which, this would be the first company after that to announce they are investing. This, however, would be in AI and computing speed that we know of. We don't have a lot of details yet, and that's what we're expecting with the statement at Mar-a-Lago. Also, President-elect Trump was very vague in his Truth Social post announcing this policy of what exactly he would do to speed up the process, because presidents before him have tried and failed to make that process go faster.
Wendy, as for most administrations, the first 100 days are critical for getting things done, establishing momentum. Is that the case for the Trump administration, do you believe? Are these first 100 days, are they going to be critical?
Absolutely, they're going to be critical. He has announced such a revamp of U.S. policy on everything from immigration to vaccines that he claims he's going to do on day one. So day one may last 100 days, or it may last, it's that 100 days is sort of a false thing that a political writer once set up 50 or 60 years ago, and it's become the benchmark ever since. He also wants to get Congress to pass both his border and tax bills, and congressional leaders were talking to him at the Army-Navy game this weekend about whether they would do that as two separate bills, which would take far longer than 100 days, or try to get them all done in one fell swoop, which also would be difficult given Congress's penchant for taking things slowly.
Yeah, exactly. Going back to some of the regulations or issues with sort of building stuff fast here, what are those hurdles? Like President-elect Trump, offering that, like if you could donate this, I will give you a fast track. But how does it actually work?
Well, I'm not, entirely familiar with all the details, but you have to go through, if you want to build a cyber, warehouse that's going to be drawing a lot of power, you're going to have to explain how you're going to do that to a number of agencies. Then there will be the lawsuits. Then there will be, negotiations about how to get that done. And in the United States, that takes a very long time. There's a lot of agencies that want their hands in it. And, people like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who are going to run Donald Trump's so-called Department of Governmental Efficiency, want to smooth that out. But as I've said, other administrations have tried and not been able to do that. These two seem to want to take a radical approach, and we have no details yet on how they're going to do that.
Wendy, what's the latest on the thinking around some of President-elect Trump's nominees for cabinet positions? I'm thinking some of the more controversial ones like Mr. Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, and maybe Robert Kennedy Jr. Where do some of those stand here at the moment?
Well, it seems at the moment like Pete Hegseth is out of the soup. It looks like his nomination may be secure. Trump and his allies literally bullied senators into coming around to supporting him by threatening them with primary challenges and social media anger and things like that. And Pete Hegseth did do a charm offensive around the Hill, although there were some who were less charmed by him. And yet then they got these threats and primary challenges and things like that, and they sort of all got in line. And there he was at the Army-Navy game with Trump over the weekend. RFK is on the Hill today. He also faces a bumpy road, and we don't know if Trump's team will do the same thing that they did with Pete Hegseth. He is meeting today with Senator Lisa Murkowski, who is very skeptical. She's a moderate Republican from Alaska who is very skeptical of his attitudes on vaccines and other things. And Mitch McConnell, the still very powerful former Senate leader, is also not happy with RFK because, as some people might know, McConnell is a polio survivor the vaccine wasn't invented when he was a child. And so he suffered from polio and still walks with a limp. And he says RFK can't even have the appearance of wanting to get rid of the polio vaccine, while Mitch McConnell is still around to vote.
Let's switch gears to talk about overseas officials and their relationship with President-elect Donald Trump. What do we know about this report that was the Canadian finance minister resigned? Have you been able to look into this at all? The finance minister abruptly quit amid a Trump rift within the Canadian administration.
You're right. I'm afraid all I know is what I've read on the Bloomberg terminal. There's excellent stories up there. So she did quit, and she suggested that either Trump or Trudeau did not want her to be finance minister anymore, and so she's out of there. It is the I think second or third finance minister that Justin Trudeau has had in the last few years, and it certainly shocked the government and affected the Canadian dollar. So we'll have to see how that shakes out during the day as we get more information.
So, Wendy, what do you think is between now and Inauguration Day? What is kind of the game plan for President-elect Trump and I guess his building, cabinet?
Well, there's not much more to do on the cabinet except wait for January when the Senate confirmation hearings will begin. There is just, the Senate is only in for another, and the House in for another week or two until they break for Christmas. So we'll have to see what, if there's any more charm offensives or meetings up on the Hill. Then those hearings begin in January. And they could be contentious for some of them. Somebody like Marco Rubio, who's the nominee for Secretary of State, should sail through. He's a well-liked senator himself. There should be no problem. But the ones you mentioned, Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel for FBI, and RFK Jr. will have a rough row to hoe. And also remember that you say, things are normally this way. We're back in Trump world, people, and nothing is normal. We don't know what kind of foreign policy activity he might be doing. We don't know who he's going to be meeting with. It's all going to be a very interesting 40 days or so until the inauguration.
Well, what we do know is that in the inauguration, he does want President Xi Jinping to come. What's that about?
We don't really know. It could have been he was on the phone with Xi Jinping and said, hey, it's going to be a party, you want to come? But because there was no formal invitation through channels, it would be highly unusual for a foreign leader to show up for a presidential inaugural. That's what ambassadors are for.
Okay.
All the ambassadors show up.
Wendy, we're going to have to, President-elect Trump is about speaking. So Wendy Benjamin, thank you so much from Bloomberg News. But now let's go down to Mar-a-Lago and listen to President-elect Donald Trump.
Take some questions later if you'd like. I'm sure you might have one or two. I'd be shocked if you didn't. I'd be very impressed. But I'm honored to welcome one of the most accomplished business leaders of our time, the founder and CEO of SoftBank, everybody knows, Masayoshi Son. Masa runs one of the largest companies in Japan and among the most successful investment and technology companies anywhere in the world, one of the most successful investors in the world. And we've just concluded a very productive meeting, and today I'm thrilled to announce that SoftBank will be investing $100 billion in America, creating 100,000 American jobs at a minimum. And he's doing this because he feels very optimistic about our country since the election. And many other people are also coming in with tremendous amounts of money. You probably noticed that a poll was just taken. It's business is literally in 39 years, there's been nothing like it. It's been the biggest increase. Small business owners gave it a 41% jump. It's the biggest jump that we've had in 39 years. And nobody's ever seen anything like it. And it's just, they're very optimistic. This historic investment is a monumental demonstration of confidence in America's future, and it will help ensure that artificial intelligence, emerging technologies, and other industries of tomorrow are built, created, and grown right here in the USA. One of the beautiful things about Masa is he's very much involved with emerging technology, probably knows it maybe better than almost anybody. So it's a great honor. And some of you remember after the 2016 election, also SoftBank committed to invest $50 billion in our country, and they did. And I'm very pleased to say that they kept that promise in every way, shape, and form. And now they're looking to do 100. And I've looked at their books. They do have the possibility of doing more. I'm going to ask them to do a little bit more. But first, I'm going to ask him to speak and just to say a few words. Masa, please. Thank you. Please. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm very, very excited. I would really like to celebrate the great victory of President Trump. And my confidence level to the economy of the United States has tremendously increased with his victory. So because of that, I'm now excited to commit this $100 billion and 100,000 jobs into the United States. This is double of last time, as President Trump said. Because I say, oh, President Trump is a double down president. I'm going to have to double down, you know, $100 billion and 100,000 jobs. This is, you know, my confidence level, because that has doubled down. So I am truly excited to make this happen. And of course, business is important, technology is important. But one more thing I'm really hoping is that this President Trump would make the world, bring the world into peace again. That's my additional hope. And I think he will actually make it happen. So anyway, I'm excited to go, and we were discussing, and President Trump said, Masa, you know, double down is not enough. Maybe, you know, go for more, right?
That's all right. I'm going to ask him right now, would you make it $200 billion and say, he can actually, believe it or not, he can actually afford to do that. Would you do that?
Well, my promise is 100, but, you know, he's now asking to do more. I think, you know, with your leadership, my partnership with you, with your support, I will try to make it happen.
That's good.
All right.
200. He'll make it happen. 200 billion investment. That's
He is a great negotiator.
He's a brilliant guy and did an unbelievable job, and the people of Japan and all over the world are very proud of him. They have tremendous respect for him. So what he does, what he just did, and I would be surprised if it didn't go to do it. When you say you'll try, I know you'll do it.
I will really try. And I need your support, though.
You'll have my support.
All right.
You'll have our country's support.
Oh, fantastic.
Thank you, Masa, very much.
Fantastic.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank
Do
you.
you want to
Great
say hello
event.
to the people of Japan who are all watching?
Well, I'm sure our people in Japan are proud to make the partnership of U.S. and Japan be stronger. And I'm very excited to make this happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Masa.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Great job. Thank you. It's amazing. It's a great gentleman, a great leader, and a great investor. So to have that offer made, and we have so many companies coming in now that will be announcing, or that will announce themselves. We don't have to be with them to do it, but they'll be announcing. And as I said, small business optimism took a 41-point jump. 41 points. It went up 41 points. That's unheard of. And that's the biggest they think in recorded history, but they know at least a minimum of 39 years. So that's great. But on behalf of the American people, I want to thank Masa for his faith in what's happening with our country and what's happening with the world. There's a whole light over the entire world. Many people, some reporters, in speaking to them, they said, you know, it actually is true. A couple of them are not necessarily friends of mine, but they said it is actually true that there's a light shining over the world. We're trying to help very strongly in getting the hostages back, as you know, with Israel and the Middle East. We're working very much on that. We're trying to get the war stopped, that horrible war that's going on in Ukraine, with Russia, Ukraine. We're going to, we've got a little progress. It's a tough one. It's a nasty one. It's nasty. People are being killed at levels that nobody's ever seen. You know, it's very level fields, and the only thing that stops a bullet is a body, a human body. And the number of soldiers that are being killed on both sides is astronomical. I've never seen anything like it. And rapidly, I get reports every week, and it's not even, you know, it's like just going down. Nobody's seen anything like it. It's a very flat surface, a very flat land. That's why it's great farming land. It's the breadbasket for the world, actually, but it's very flat, and there's nothing to stop a bullet but a body. There's no protection, no nothing, and what's happening there is far worse than people are reporting for both sides. So we're going to do our best, and we've been doing our best, and we'll see what happens. But since the election, I've been working every day to put the world at ease a little bit, to get rid of the wars. We had no wars when I left office, and now it's the whole world is blowing up. But there's great optimism, and you saw that by SoftBank. Starting on day one, we'll implement a rapid series of bold reforms to restore our nation to full prosperity. We're going to go full prosperity, and to build the greatest economy the world has ever seen, just as we had just a short time ago. We had it in my term. We had the greatest economy that the world had seen. We were blowing away everybody. Our country was doubling up on China, doubling up on everybody, and everybody knows it. And then we had to slow it down with COVID, unfortunately, at the end. But even then, I gave it back with a substantial increase of the stock market, bigger than it was pre-COVID, so it was pretty amazing. Already preparations are underway to slash massive numbers of job-killing regulations, eliminating 10 old regulations for every new one. You put a new regulation on, you have to get rid of 10, and we'll be able to do it. And that was about the percentage we had. We cut more regulations than any president has ever cut, by far, actually, by approximately 5 times. Some of those regulations, unfortunately, were put back on, but we'll catch up very quickly. We'll catch up with it. One of the things I'd like to ask the Biden administration, as you probably heard, there are 2 events that took place. We're talking about a friendly takeover, a friendly transition, as they like to say. This is a friendly transition, and it is, but there are 2 events that took place that I think are very terrible. One is that if people don't come back to work, come back into the office, they're going to be dismissed. And somebody in the Biden administration gave a 5-year waiver of that, so that for 5 years, people don't have to come back into the office. It involved 49,000 people. For 5 years, they don't have to go. They just signed this thing. It's ridiculous. So it was like a gift to a union, and we're going to obviously be in court to stop it. The other thing is really terrible. We spent a tremendous amount of money on building the wall. The wall was designed specifically by the Border Patrol because it's very hard to climb. They need to have see-through. They need it to be steel because you can't cut. It's very powerful steel. It's very hard steel. It's a special type of steel, but very, very hard to cut. Inside the steel, as you know, we pour concrete, and that's a grade 10 concrete, which is a very strong concrete, very as though you were building about a 60-story building. It's very powerful concrete. They've made tremendous technology advances in the word concrete. Who would think that? But I know that from the construction industry. Today, what you can do with concrete is incredible. So we have a very strong concrete. And then we have a rebar. We put rebar inside the concrete, and the rebar likewise is very hard to cut. So it's a very expensive process, very expensive wall. And then we put a anti-climb plate on the top. You saw that. And I didn't like the look of it, but then when I watched, we had people testing. We had mountain climbers actually testing, and they were not able to get over the anti-climb plate. So I said, all right, I guess we're going to put it on. That plate on top, which I never loved the look of it, but it works so unbelievably well. You have to do it. So we spent a lot of money on building it, and we have hundreds of miles that we put up. A lot of people don't realize, but we did 571 miles of wall. That's why we had such good records, in addition to the fact that Mexico helped us with their military. They kept people out, and they were actually very good under the past leader. But now we ordered an additional 200 miles of wall. It's very expensive, and now it's about double the price of what it would have been 6 years ago. And the administration is trying to sell it for 5 cents on the dollar, knowing that we're getting ready to put it up. And what they're doing is really an act. It's almost a criminal act. They know we're going to use it, and if we don't have it, we're going to have to rebuild it, and it'll cost double what it cost years ago, and that's hundreds of millions of dollars, because you're talking about a lot of a lot of wall. I built much more than I said I was going to build, but then after it was built, I said, you know, we can do some more because it's sort of like water, people flow through, and that will pretty much really take care of it. And what happened is they just, as you see, they're trying to sell it for 5 cents on the dollar, and that's really, that has nothing to do with a smooth transition. That has to do with people really trying to stop our nation. And all it means really is that we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars more, not even talking about the time. Time would be pretty long, but we'll spend hundreds of millions of dollars more on building the same wall that we already have. And people have already come back to us that have deals at 5 cents and 4 cents, and one guy at 3 cents on the dollar, and they offered to sell it back to us at more money than it cost us to build substantially. Can you believe it? So they make a deal with the United States to buy it for pennies, and then they call us and they say, do you want to buy it back? We'll sell it back to you for hundreds of dollars a foot. Hundreds of dollars, from pennies to hundreds of dollars a foot. And we can't let this take place. Now we're going to go, I spoke with the Attorney General of Texas, I spoke to the senators of Texas, I spoke to a lot of people, and hopefully they'll be able to stop. We're going to be, having a restraining order. But just think about how ridiculous it is. And this is just people that don't want this country to succeed. And this has nothing to do with Democrat or Republican. This has to do with common sense. We won on common sense, and this is maybe one of the most egregious examples I've seen. So the people that are buying it or trying to buy it are trying to make a deal with us to sell it back at hundreds of times more than we paid. And this is all because the Democrats. So I'm asking today Joe Biden to please stop selling the wall. We're going to use that to create a strong barrier, and it worked. That's why our numbers were so good. It really worked, and it worked well. And it's very expensive to do, and I'm asking Joe Biden to stop his people from giving it away. It's something that people can't even believe is happening. So hopefully Joe will be able to stop it. We'll soon unleash American energy, and this will be done at levels not seen before, issuing quick approvals for pipelines, drilling, and other infrastructure. It'll be clean energy, and we'll bring in the price of electricity, and we're going to bring it down fast. We're also going to create clean coal. Clean coal is something that has really taken over. We have coal that will last for over 1,000 years. We have so much coal, and with a process, it becomes clean coal. It's very powerful energy, unlike wind. It's very, very powerful, and we're going to be doing a lot of clean coal for the people of West Virginia and others, Wyoming, so many states. We have great states, and they'll be happy to hear it. But we're going to be very much into clean coal. I don't ever use the word coal. I use the word clean coal. And I'll keep my promise to pass historic tax cuts for American families, workers, and businesses that create jobs in America. As you know, we're giving tax cuts if they do it here. We brought it down from 44%, 42%. In some cases, it was 39%. We brought it all the way down to 21%. And now we're bringing it down to 15%, but only if they make their product, their car, or whatever they're doing in the United States, in the U.S., and people are thrilled. I've had the smartest people on Wall Street call me. They said, where'd you get that idea? And it doesn't seem that complicated, right? But it's it's like the paperclip. Nobody ever thought of it. One guy thought of it. Everybody looked at it. They said, wow, that was a good idea. Why didn't I think of it? But we're bringing it down 6 more points, and that will put us really at the best level we've ever had for bringing in business. We've never been down to that level. We'll be among the lowest taxed states, and a lot of businesses are going to come in. Between that and our taxing and tariff policies, we're going to have business like nobody's ever seen in this country before. That's why we're, having a 41-year record in optimism from small businesses and big businesses. And I'll keep my promise to pass historic tax cuts for families, workers, and businesses that create jobs in America. Any business that invests $1 billion or more in the United States will be eligible for fully expedited permits and approvals, including environmental approvals from the federal government. So when companies come in, if they're going to invest $1 billion or more, there'll be many of them, and they'll go into Detroit, and they'll go into a lot of places where we want them. You saw how well I did with the auto workers. We did unbelievably. You saw how well we did with the Teamsters, and also the non-union were record 98%, 97%. Nobody's ever got numbers like that because we're bringing business decades of stupidity. Through the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk has been working very hard with various people, including Vivek. We'll going to eliminate hundreds of billions of dollars of waste and fraud, and I can only tell you, I'll give you a little early report, they're finding things that you wouldn't even believe. So we're looking to save maybe $2 trillion, and it'll have no impact. Actually, it'll make life better, but it'll have no impact on people. It's not like we will never cut Social Security or things like that. It's just waste, fraud, and abuse. And we'll immediately restore the sovereign borders of the United States and stop illegal immigration, which is costing us, I believe, trillions of dollars a year. I think it's a cost that nobody's ever seen anything like it. I don't know how can you be satisfied releasing prisoners into the United States. Think of this. You're releasing prisoners from jails all over the world, not just in South America. From the Congo, I would talk about it all the time. They're a very big sender of people. But from all over the world, they're sending prisoners out of their jails. Some of their jails are empty, and they will be empty soon if this ever continued. I spoke with the president of Mexico, and as you know, I spoke with Justin Trudeau of Canada, and we told them it's not fair, not right. You can't let these people come into our country. And they understand they're very much on notice, and they're going to have to stop this from happening. They're going to have to stop it. We lose a lot of money to Mexico. We lose a lot of money to Canada, tremendous amount. We're subsidizing Canada. We're subsidizing Mexico. That can't go on. And I get along with the people of Mexico and Canada very well, but we can't let that happen. Why are we supporting and giving other countries hundreds of billions of dollars? It's not fair. It's not right. And the people of Mexico and Canada fully understand that. We've talked about it before, but now we're doing something about it. We started, and then we had to fix the COVID situation, and that's what we did. But now we're doing it. We're doing it from the beginning. Howard will be largely in charge. We'll be working on it together. Howard's terrific. He's done a fantastic job, and he's really helped us a lot with transition. I think we have fantastic people. Coming in. So all of these policies will help us rapidly defeat inflation, create millions of new jobs, and put money in the pockets of the hardworking families of our country, pay off debt. We're going to be paying off a tremendous amount of debt. We're at $36 trillion. You don't want to be there. And we're going to be using a lot of the money that we make. We're going to be opening up a lot of businesses that are going to be pouring in because of our tax policy. And we're going to use the money that we made to pay off debt and to reduce taxes. We're going to further reduce taxes. If you remember when we reduced them last time, that brought a tremendous amount. We brought it down to 21%, and that was the biggest tax cut in the history of our country. And nobody ever thought this would happen, but this is what's supposed to happen. We actually ended up taking in more revenue at 21 than we did at 40%, which was pretty amazing. But this will be the most exciting and successful period of reform and renewal in all of American history, maybe of global history. The golden age of America, I call it. It's begun. So it's the golden age of America, and that's what it's going to be. And we hope we don't have any intervening problems, because things happen, like out of nowhere came the China virus, out of nowhere came other things. We don't want to have. You know, when I left, we had no wars. We had no problems. The Middle East was good. We did the Abraham Accords. We did things that nobody thought were even possible. But think of it, 4 years ago, we had no wars. You didn't have Russia going into Ukraine. They wouldn't have done it. They weren't even thinking about it. When they saw what happened in Afghanistan, I think they gave them an idea, but they wouldn't have done it. They would have never gone. President Putin would have never gone in. And now you look at all those people are dead. All those cities are destroyed. You know, it's nice to say they want their land back, but the cities are largely destroyed. They've left Kiev because probably maybe they want to use it or occupy it, but they haven't done it. They've done a lot of damage, but relatively compared to the other cities, very little. But many of those cities are gone. Those beautiful towers, those beautiful buildings that they had are now laying on their sides, destroyed, totally destroyed. The turrets and all of the magnificent 1,000-year-old, 2,000-year-old structures that were very strong are blown to smithereens. You look at some of those cities and not one building standing. So, you know, when you say take over the country, take over what? Take over what? That's a 100-year rebuild. Take 100 years to rebuild it, and you can never have it the way it was. What a shame. It should have never happened. It would have never happened. If I were president, that war would have never happened. Nor would Israel have happened with the attack on Israel. So we're inheriting big challenges at home and all over the world. Again, we had no wars. We had no problems. We had no inflation. We had no inflation. We had it less than 1%. Perfect number. And then we had inflation, the likes of which I say, I don't believe the country's ever seen inflation like that. They say 38 years. I don't know. I think it's probably ever, but we're going to take care of all of it. We're going to get the prices down by energy. The energy is going to come in. We have more energy than anybody else. We're going to use it. We don't have to buy energy from Venezuela when we have 50 times more than they do. It's just insane what we're doing. So we will not rest until America is richer, safer, and stronger than it has ever been before. And we have a big head start. Last time we didn't. And last time we didn't know the people. We didn't know a lot of things. But by the time we got it up and going, it was incredible. Again, we built the greatest economy in history for that period of time. And we'll do it again. I believe substantially more so because we understand, number one, the people of Washington. I know them. I didn't know any of them virtually. I relied on other people for recommendations. Some were very good recommendations. We had some great people. Bob Lighthizer, I thought was great. We had a lot of great people. And but we had some people that I wouldn't have used in retrospect, and now I know them better than anybody, better than they know themselves. So once again, I'd like to thank Massa for what he's done with that investment, which will end up being $200 billion, I believe. But I just want to thank him. He's just an outstanding man. When you have that kind of brain power wanting to invest in this country, and that's money that he can't invest elsewhere. So that's a big investment, but makes me feel very good. Makes me feel that we're absolutely on the right track. So thank you to Massa, and we'll take a couple of questions. Yeah, please. Jeff.
Can you tell us what you said to Prime Minister Netanyahu in your call on Saturday?
Yeah.
And have you spoken to President Putin since your election?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the Putin question, but I will comment on Bibi. We had a very good talk. We discussed what is going to happen, and I'll be very available on January 20th, and we'll see. As you know, I gave warning that if these hostages aren't back home by that date, all hell's going to break out, and very strong. But we generally just discussed, I asked him, where are things? Mike Waltz they're doing a great job, by the way. Everybody is very happy. I think he's doing a fantastic job. But he was very much involved in the call. But it was a recap call more than anything else.
President Trump, how do you plan to stop the ban on TikTok next month?
Who?
How do you plan to stop the ban on TikTok next month?
We'll take a look at TikTok. You know, I have a warm spot in my heart for TikTok because I won youth by 34 points. And there are those that say that TikTok has something to do with that. Now, Joe Rogan did, and some of the other people that were recommended by my son Barron, he knew names. I said, who is that? Tell me, who's that? Dad, you got to be kidding. I can't believe you don't know. And I did those interviews, and it was actually sort of cute, if you want to know the truth. But we did them, and that had an impact. But TikTok had an impact, and so we're taking a look at it. But, you know, we won youth. Republicans are always 30 points down in youth. I don't know why. but we ended up finishing. There was one poll that showed us down about 30. We were 35 or 36 points up with young people. So I have a little bit of a warm spot in my heart, I'll be honest. Yes,
President. Are you entertaining the idea of preemptive strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities? Against Iran's nuclear
Well, I can't
facilities?
tell you that. I mean,
Would you?
I mean, it's a wonderful question, but am I going to do preemptive strikes? Why would I say that? Can you imagine if I said yes or no? You'd say, that was strange that he answered that way. Am I going to do preemptive strikes on Iran? Is that a serious question? How could I answer a question like that? Say it.
Would you be in support of Israeli strikes on Iran's nuclear
How could I tell you a thing like that now? It's just so, you don't talk about that before something may or may not happen. You know, just, I don't want to insult you. I just think it's just not something that I would ever answer having to do with there or any other place in the world.
President Trump. Time magazine interview. Can I ask, just clearly, do you believe there's a connection between vaccines and autism? Do you believe there's a link?
Well, I don't look. Right now, you have some very brilliant people looking at it. I had dinner the other night with the head of Pfizer, the head of Eli Lilly, and RFK, as you know, and Oz. And we had, and other people within the administration that are involved, in the medical. And we're looking to find out, you know, if you look at autism, so 30 years ago I've heard numbers of like 1 in 200,000, 1 in 100,000. And now I'm hearing numbers of 1 in 100. So something's wrong. There's something wrong. And we're going to find out about it.
What about
Can I follow up on Robert Kennedy? He's on the Hill today. He's meeting with senators. What do you say to people who are worried that his views on vaccines will translate into policies that will make their kids less safe?
No, I think he's going to be much less radical than you would think. I think he's got a very open mind, or I wouldn't have put him there. He's going to be very much less radical. But there are problems. I mean, we don't do as well as a lot of other nations, and those nations use nothing. And we're going to find out what those problems are. And another thing that came up, the dinner was fascinating because I had Bobby and I had, again, the head of Pfizer, you know who that is. He's a highly respected man who has run an incredible company, likewise with Lilly, the top two people. And we had the head of the industry also. So all companies were represented. And I said, let's have it out now a little bit. And you know what came out of that meeting is that we're paying far too much because we're paying much more than other countries. And we have laws that make it impossible to reduce. And we have a thing called the middleman. You know the middleman, right? The horrible middleman that makes more money, frankly, than the drug companies, and they don't do anything except they're a middleman. We're going to knock out the middleman. I'm going to be very unpopular after that statement.
Mr. President,
I don't know who these middlemen are, but they are rich as hell. And we're going to knock out the middlemen. We're going to get drug costs down at levels that nobody has ever seen before. And that really, I tell you, we spend more time talking about that with Bobby and with the executives and Oz, all of them. We spent more time talking about that than anything else.
Thanks, President Trump. What about the polio vaccine?
Well, I'm a big believer in it, and I think everything should be looked at, but I'm a big believer in the polio vaccine, the Salk vaccine.
Do you think schools should mandate vaccines? Do you think schools should mandate vaccines?
I don't like mandates. I'm not a big mandate person, so, you know, I was against mandates. Mostly Democrat governors did the mandates, and they did a very poor thing. It was, you know, in retrospect, they made a big mistake having to do with the education of children. You know, they lost like a year or 2 years of their lives. The mandate was a bad thing. I was against the mandate.
So is that something you'd want to...
Yes, please.
Do you expect Ron DeSantis to appoint Laura Trump to Senator Marco Rubio's seat?
No, I don't. I probably don't, but I don't know. Ron's doing a good job. It's his choice, nothing to do with me. Laura's unbelievable. I mean, she was incredible. The job she did at the RNC as chairman, along with Michael Whatley, the combination. But I could just speak for Laura. She is so highly respected by women. I mean, even her workout routines are through the roof. She lifts 150 pounds. I don't know how the hell she does it. She's a bad example for men and women's sports because I wouldn't be able to beat her, I don't believe. I'd try like hell. But no, she's an incredible woman. And, you know, it's funny, people oftentimes talk about nepotism. I never had, when I put her there, people said, how did you get her to do it? You know, she could have run for the Senate in North Carolina. Ted Budd would be the first to say, and he wouldn't have run. Nobody would have run. And she just said, no, I want to really focus on my children. When the election, and my family, she has a great family. When the election started getting closer, I asked her, would she go to Washington and work on the, you know, as chairman of the committee along with Michael Watley. And they did such an unbelievable job, especially on cheating. They stopped it, or at least they stymied it. Too big to rig. And we won in a landslide. You know, we won tremendously. She did an amazing job. Now Ron is going to have to make, because Marco has been really a star already. And we haven't started, but, you know, we see signs of from some people, or very early, we see signs of stardom, and Marco has done incredibly. He's sort of born for it. It was such an easy decision. The Marco decision was such an easy, but he leaves a vacancy in Florida, and Ron's going to have to make that decision, and he'll make the right decision. I also know that Laura's got so many other things. I mean, she's got so many other things. People want her to be on television. They want to give her contracts. You know, her predominant thought is our country and her family. Those are her thoughts. But she's got so many other things that she's talking about.
Mr. President.
He'll make the right decision.
Mr. President.
Should senators who oppose your nominees, your cabinet nominees, should they be primary?
If they are unreasonable, I'll give you a different answer, an answer that you'll be shocked to hear. If they're unreasonable, if they're opposing somebody for political reasons or stupid reasons, I would say has nothing to do with me. I would say they probably would be primaried. But if they're reasonable, fair, and really disagree with something or somebody, I could see that happening. But I do believe that if they're I think we have great people. I think we have a great group of people. Pam has been unbelievably received. You take a look, Pam Bondi. So many have been just unbelievably received. I think Pete Hegseth is making tremendous strides over the last week. He's going to be great. Look, he went to Princeton, he went to Harvard, he was a great student there, but he really was, from the first day I met him, all he wanted to talk about was military. He's just a military guy. I think it's a natural. This was my idea. And you know, Pete Hegseth gave up a lot because he was going big places in Fox, big places, a lot of money. And he didn't even hesitate. When I said, do you want to do this? He said, absolutely. I said, you know, if it doesn't work out, you'll never have the opportunity that you have right now in terms of the world of entertainment or business, whatever you want to call it. You'll never have that opportunity again. In fact, it could be just the opposite because it's nasty out there. He said, I don't care. I have to do it for my country. He gave up a tremendous amount. If this didn't work, it would be a tragedy. Because, but that's what he loves. He loves the military. I never talked to him about anything else. He'd talk about the military. He'd come to see me about a soldier that was unfairly treated, and could I help? That's the only thing I virtually ever talked to him about. And I always remembered it. I've seen him many times, and I don't think I've ever had a subject on anything other than military with him. That's where his love is. And he didn't say, well, I'd like to think about it. I'd like to talk to my family. He said, not even a contest. And, you know, he was going through the roof over there. He was doing great. They have the #1 show that Saturday and Sunday with Will and Rachel. That was great chemistry. And if this didn't work out for him, it would be actually sort of tragic. Yeah.
Would you consider pardoning Eric Adams?
Yeah, I would. Yeah. I think that he was treated pretty unfairly. Now, I haven't seen the gravity of it all, but it seems, you know, like being upgraded in an airplane many years ago. I know probably everybody here has been upgraded. They see you're all stars, and they say, I want to upgrade that person from NBC. I'm going to upgrade him. And that would mean you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. I don't know. Somehow, I would. I mean, I'd have to see it because I don't know the facts. I think he was treated. You know, it's very interesting when he essentially went against what was happening with the migrants coming in, and you know, he made some pretty strong statements like, "This is not sustainable." I said, "You know what? He'll be indicted soon," and I said it not as a prediction, a little bit lightheartedly, but I said it. I said he's going to be indicted. And a few months later, he got indicted. So yeah, I would certainly look at it. Yes.
Mr. President, can I ask you a question about the drones?
Well, you know, we had 5,000 troops along the border, and I asked a couple of generals, so we have an army of 250,000 in Syria, and you had an army of 400,000. They have many more people than that. Turkey is a major force, by the way, and Erdogan is somebody I got along with great, but he has a major military force, and his has not been worn out with war. It hasn't been worn out with all of the other things. I mean, he's built a very strong, powerful army. And so we have 5,000 soldiers in between a 5 million person army and a 250,000 person army. And I asked the general, what do you think of that situation? He said, they'll be wiped out immediately. And I moved them out because, and I took a lot of heat. And you know what happened? Nothing. Nothing. I saved a lot of lives. Now we have 900. They put some back. But 900, if you're talking about two, now one of the sides has been essentially wiped out, but nobody knows who the other side is. But I do. You know who it is? Turkey. Okay? Turkey's the one behind it. He's a very smart guy. They've wanted it for thousands of years, and he got it. And those people that went in are controlled by Turkey. And that's okay. It's another way to fight. But no, I don't think that I want to have our soldiers killed. But I don't think that will happen now anyway because the one side's been decimated.
Mr. President, I want to ask you a question about the drones.
Are you concerned about more unrest in that region, or do you think it will calm?
Well, nobody knows what the final outcome is going to be in the region. You know, nobody knows who really the final. I believe it's Turkey, and I think Turkey is very smart. He's a very smart guy, and he's very tough. But Turkey did an unfriendly takeover without a lot of lives being lost. I can say that Assad was a butcher. What he did to children. You remember I attacked him with the 58 missiles, unbelievable missiles coming from ships 700 miles away, and every one of them hit their target. But I did that. That was the red line in the sand. Obama drew it, and then he refused to honor what he did. He said, if anybody goes across the red line, and Assad killed many more children after that, and Obama did nothing, but I did. I hit him with a lot of missiles. In fact, President Xi was sitting here the night he was in that dining room having chocolate cake. Remember the famous chocolate cake? But and that's when I explained what we were doing as the missiles were shot. And it was amazing as to precision because every one of those missiles hit its target from a long distance away. Had President Obama drawn the line and where it meant something, you wouldn't have even had Russia there. But in the end, I never understood why Russia went there. They were not getting very much out of it. But now their time is taken up with Ukraine, and we'd like to get them to stop on Ukraine, and Ukraine stop also. As you know, when I went to the cathedral, which was fantastic, the job that they've done in France, and the job that Macron, you know, Emmanuel did. He did a phenomenal job on the rebuilding of that cathedral. It's magnificent, and they did a great thing. And they had great respect for our country. They treated me, meaning I'm the country, I'm the representative of our country, and we were treated with great respect. And one of the people that came to pay his respects is, as you know, Ukraine, Zelensky. And he would like to have peace. He wants peace. Everyone's being killed. It's the worst carnage that this world has seen since World War II. I've had pictures of fields where bodies are lying on top of bodies. Looks like the old pictures of the Civil War, where just bodies are all over. if you saw those pictures, you'd feel more strongly about it. It's got to stop. And we're trying to get it to stop. Well, we're gonna see. We're gonna be talking. We'll be talking to President Putin, and we'll be talking to the representatives, Zelensky and representatives from Ukraine. We got to stop it. It's carnage.
What about the fear here at home of the drones?
Thank you. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Can you comment on the drones that are flying around New Jersey ports? It seems like the American people have a big disconnect.
The government knows what is happening. Look, our military knows where they took off from. If it's a garage, they can go right into that garage. They know where it came from and where it went. And for some reason, they don't want to comment. And I think they'd be better off saying what it is. Our military knows and our president knows. And for some reason, they want to keep people in suspense. I can't imagine it's the enemy, because if it was the enemy, they'd blast it out. Even if they were late, they'd blast it. Something strange is going on. For some reason, they don't want to tell the people, and they should, because the people are really, I mean, they happen to be over Bedminster.
Will you shoot them down?
They're very close to Bedminster. I think maybe I won't spend the weekend in Bedminster. I've decided to cancel my trip.
Have you received an intelligence briefing on the drones?
I don't want to comment on that.
Have you been?
Do you have any reason to think they're a threat?
Two quick questions. First, on vaccines, do you want RFK Jr. to revoke any vaccines?
No, I want him to come back with a report as to what he thinks. We're going to find out a lot. We're doing two things. We're going to have tremendous cost savings will come out of this. That's a minimum. And we're also going to have, and I think, very serious discussions about certain things, whether it's pesticides. Europe doesn't use pesticides, and yet they have a better mortality rate than we do. They don't use pesticides. In fact, they use it as an excuse not to take our farm product. We spend billions and billions of dollars on pesticides, and something bad's happening. Again, you take a look at autism today versus 20, 25 years ago, it's like not even believable. So we're going to have reports. No, nothing's going to happen very quickly. I think you're going to find that Bobby he's a very rational guy. I found him to be very rational. No, nothing, you're not going to lose the polio vaccine. That's not going to happen. I saw what happened with the polio. I have friends that were very much affected by that. I have friends from many years ago, and they have, obviously, they're still in not such good shape because of it. And many people died. And the moment they took that vaccine, it ended. Dr. Jonas Salk did a great job, so I don't anticipate that at all. But we're going to look into finding why is the autism rate so much higher than it was 20, 25, 30 years ago. I mean, it's 100 times higher. There's something wrong, and we're going to try finding that. We're also going to find out why are we paying more than other countries. And we were in the process of doing that through transparency and other things. We were doing a good job in that first term, and we brought it down. We got the $35, all of the different things. We got, we were the ones that got all of that done. Every one of those things, we got them done. I said, I hope I win, because otherwise somebody's going to take a lot of credit for what we did. But now what happens is we're gonna have a big conversation on price. Why is it that Germany and UK and other countries are paying so much more for the same box of medicine made in the same plant? Why is it that we're paying many times more? And I know the answer, because our government didn't do what they were supposed to do. And what I put in place was terminated unexpectedly by the Biden administration, and they shouldn't have terminated it. It would have had a huge impact.
And Mr. President, one quick question. On Ukraine, you mentioned that some of the areas are already decimated. Do you believe that Ukraine should cede territory to Russia?
Well, I'm going to let you know that after I have my first meeting. But a lot of that territory, when you look at what's happened to those, I mean, there are cities that there's not a building standing. It's a demolition site. There's not a building standing. So people can't go back to those cities. There's nothing there. It's just rubble. Just like when I knocked down a building in Manhattan, which is actually, this is worse, actually, because we do it step by step. This thing has just got demolish. And by the way, in those buildings are many people. Many people were in those buildings. You know, when they say the number in Ukraine is going to be a much higher number of death, is going to be a much higher number than you're hearing. You know, they're big buildings. This is what I did very well. And these are very long buildings. They're 15 to 20 stories high. They're massive buildings. I was surprised at how big. And they're flattened like a pancake. 1 or 2 bombs hit them and they just collapsed. And they'd say, nobody was hurt. Well, nobody knows who was in those buildings. There were a lot of people in those buildings. They're going to find that when they start doing the removal. Many more people are being killed in the Ukraine war with Russia than is being reported, and that includes soldiers. The soldiers are being, it's a carnage that we haven't seen since the Second World War. It's got to be stopped, and I'm doing my best to stop it. Yeah, please, go ahead.
You had a meeting with Mrs. Abe yesterday, but Japanese Prime Minister... Mrs. Abe, yeah. And Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba is hoping to have a meeting anytime soon.
I will do that. In fact, I sent him a memento. I sent him a book, the Prime Minister. But Mrs. Abe was very close with our First Lady, with Melania, and she loved Melania's book. And she called and wanted to know if she could have... I was very close to the Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe. He was great. He was a great man. And his wife wanted to know if it would be possible to have dinner. And it was just out of respect to Shinzo. And yes, I'd love to see the Prime Minister, and we will do that. I actually sent him a book and some other things for him through Mrs. Abe.
Will that happen before the inauguration day?
It could. If they'd like to do that, I would do that, yeah.
Sir, President Trump,
I have great respect for the position, and if he'd like to do that, I'd be here.
And you have report that Ambassador to Japan will be George Glass. Is that your final decision?
Highly respected man. That's right. Highly respected. He's been an ambassador before. Did a fantastic job. We consider Japan very important. He's very highly respected. Okay, couple of
Which other world leaders have you invited to the inauguration? Which other world leaders have you invited to the inauguration?
The world leaders are calling me, and some really would like to meet. No, I mean literally, they're calling me, and I'll be seeing some of them. I think it's rude not to. I mean, it's hard to say I'm not going to see you. And I've spoken to way over 100 where they called to congratulate on not only the election, but the size of the election, the extent of the victory. And they were great. I mean, I spoke to over 100 countries. You wouldn't believe how many countries there are. And I'm trying the best I can to get back to everybody, but there are a lot of countries, and every one of them, literally everyone called, and it was very nice. So, yeah, I'd see some if some felt it was an emergency. I've seen, as you know, I've seen President Zelensky. He came to France while I was there for the cathedral opening. They actually had about 70 presidents and prime ministers, and in one case, a king. We saw some great people. I also met with William, and I was very impressed by William. I think William is terrific. I was very impressed by William. As you know, I met with him, too.
Are you just
President Trump,
Did you invite Zelensky to the inauguration?
No, but if he'd like to come, I'd like to have him. I mean, I didn't invite him, no.
Are you disappointed Are you disappointed that China's Xi won't be at the inauguration?
I don't know that he won't be at the inauguration. I mean, I haven't really spoken to him about it. I don't know that, actually. I would say that if he'd like to come, I'd love to have him. But there's been nothing much discussed. I have had discussions with him, letters, et cetera, at a very high level. You know, we had a very good relationship until COVID. COVID didn't end the relationship, but it was a bridge too far for me. But if he'd like to come, I'd certainly be. He hasn't, just so you understand, he hasn't said one way or the other. Because a lot of people say he won't come, he will come. People think he will come, he won't come. It's something we barely discussed, just about didn't discuss. But I have had, especially through letters, some very good conversations.
Have you had conversations with Venezuela?
You know, because China and the United States can together solve all of the problems of the world, if you think about it. So it's very important. And, you know, he was a friend of mine. I mean, he was here for a long time, right in that spot, except sitting in a very comfortable chair. He wasn't standing like you are. But we spent hours and hours talking. And, you know, he's an amazing guy.
Have you spoken to Venezuela?
The press hates when I say that, but he's an amazing person.
Have you spoken to anyone in Venezuela, sir? On the border. On the border. If I could just ask you on the border.
United
Hold on one second,
Healthcare
Gary.
shooting.
Real quick.
The United Healthcare shooting, the
I think
shooting of the
it's
CEO.
terrible.
Can you give us your thoughts about that? And what do you make of the reaction
I think
around
it's
the
terrible.
suspected shooter? Does that tell you anything about how people
I think it's a terrible thing. I think it's really terrible that some people seem to admire him, like him. And I was happy to see that it wasn't specific to this gentleman that was killed. It's just an overall sickness as opposed to a specific sickness. That was a terrible thing. It was cold-blooded, just a cold-blooded, horrible killing. And how people can like this guy is, that's a sickness, actually. That's really very bad, especially the way it was done. It was so bad, right in the back. And very bad, very thing like that. You can't believe that some people, and maybe it's fake news. I don't know. It's hard to believe that that can even be thought of. But it seems that there's a certain appetite for him. I don't get it. Yeah, please.
Could you just comment on?
I want to expand on the defamation lawsuits. Could you see moving that to other people with individual platforms, social media influencers, people that
Or newspapers, yeah. Yeah. Oh, I do. I think you have to do it because they're very dishonest. We need a great media. We need a fair media. We need, it's very important. And we need borders. We need walls, but we need borders and we need fair elections. You look at California, millions and millions of ballots were sent out. They're still counting the vote in California with the machines. They're counting the vote. If you had paper ballots, the votes would have been counted 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. Now, you need fair elections, you need borders, and you need a fair press. And the press is, no, I see others. I have a few others that I'm doing. I'm going to, as an example, I'm doing this not because I want to. I'm doing this because I feel I have an obligation to. I'm going to be bringing one against the people in Iowa, their newspaper, which had a very, very good pollster who got me right all the time. And then just before the election, she said I was going to lose by 3 or 4 points, and it became the biggest story all over the world because I was going to win Iowa by 20 points. The farmers loved me, and I loved the farmers. And it was interesting the way she did it. She brought it down 2 weeks before. She said I was going to only win by 4. That was a big story. But that was good because she brought it down from like 22 points to 4 or whatever the number was, way up. Way up, an easy win. We never even thought to go there. I respect them, I love them, and they understand there's no reason to go there because she brought it from way up, walk away, which it was, and it turned out to be in the election too, by the way. It was a win by many, many points. And then she brought it down very smartly to 4 a couple of weeks before, and everyone said, wow, that's amazing. He's only up by 4 points. Then she brought it down to where I was down by 3 or 4, whatever number she used. And that was the Des Moines Register, and it was their parent. And in my opinion, it was fraud, and it was election interference. You know, she's gotten me right always. She's a very good pollster. She knows what she was doing. And she then quit before. And we'll probably be filing a major lawsuit against them today or tomorrow. We're filing one on 60 Minutes, you know about that, where they took Kamala's answer, which was a crazy answer, a horrible answer, and they took the whole answer out and they replaced it with something else she said later on in the interview, which wasn't a great answer, but it wasn't like the first one. The first was grossly incompetent. It was weird. And that was fraud and election interference by their news magazine, a big part of CBS News. So as you know, we're involved in that one. We're involved in one which has been going on for a while and very successfully against Bob Woodward, where he didn't quote me properly from the tapes. And then on top of everything else, he sold the tapes, which he wasn't allowed to do. He could only use them for reporting purposes, not for sale purposes. And he admits that. and I think we'll be successful on that one. And we have one very interestingly on Pulitzer, because reporters at the New York Times, Washington Post got Pulitzer Prizes for their wonderful, accurate, and highly professional reporting on the Russia hoax. Well, it turned out to be a hoax, and they were exactly wrong. People, like many people, John Solomon, Sean Hannity's not for Pulitzer, but Sean Hannity got it right. Many people got it right. Tucker got it right. Jesse got it right. Laura got it right. Janine got it right. A lot of people got it right. They didn't get anything. They gave it to reporters that got it absolutely wrong. And now everybody admits it was a hoax. And I want them to take back the Pulitzer Prizes and pay big damages. And I think we're doing very well on that one. They have no excuse for it. They gave a Pulitzer Prize to writers that got Russia wrong. And so I think we're doing well. And I feel I have to do this. I shouldn't really be the one to do it. It should have been Justice Department or somebody else, but I have to do it. It costs a lot of money to do it, but we have to straighten out the press. Our press is very corrupt, almost as corrupt as our elections.
Are you worried about Venezuela? Sir, have you had any discussions with Venezuela?
For January 6th defendants, you had said in the first few minutes of your administration you want to issue pardons for January 6th defendants. Does that include, will that be a blanket pardon? Does that include
Well, you'll find
everyone?
out, but it's going to go quickly.
And just to follow up on your
Have you had any
previous
discussion, sir, with in terms of your mass deportation plans, have you had any preliminary discussions with countries like Venezuela, from where the Tren de Aragua gang is now popping up?
They'll
across the
take them
country?
back.
They're going to take them back.
They're all taking them back, yep. And if they don't, they'll be met very harshly economically. Okay, they'll all take them back. You know, Venezuela and other countries were not behaving very well with us during my administration, and within 24 hours they were behaving very well. They'll all take them back.
And separately, can I ask a follow-up
Jeff,
on that?
nice to see you, Jeff. This is like the old days, right?
Nice to see you too.
You look much better now than you did 4 years ago. What are you doing? What's he doing? All right, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. The first day you just mentioned that you're in office, I imagine you've got some executive orders that you're going to go through. Can you tell us what
We'll have a lot. Well,
what are your priorities?
I'll bet you could tell. You could say as well as I could. We will have many executive orders and other things that we'll be signing on the first day.
Can you also, just going back to my initial question about the Middle East, you said that your conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu was kind of a review. Did you repeat
We
that
just had a
threat?
very good conversation. And, you know, the real conversations will start on the 20th. But we had a really good conversation, and I think we're going to be in a good place in the Middle East. I think the Middle East will be in a good place. I think actually more difficult is going to be the Russia-Ukraine situation. I see that as more difficult.
When you say there will be
I don't think they should have allowed missiles to be shot 200 miles into Russia. I think that was a bad thing. And that brought the Koreans in, you know, North Korea, another man I get along with very well. I'm the only one that does. But that did a lot of bad things. I don't think that should have been allowed. Not when there's a possibility, and certainly not just weeks before I take over. Why would they do that without asking me what I thought? I wouldn't have had them do that. I think that was a big mistake they made.
Will you reverse that decision when you're in office to let those
I might, yeah.
missiles be
I thought it was a very stupid thing to do.
And when you
So
say
do you have any reaction
just
to
one last
Jim
one on
Cross?
this, when you say that there will be hell to pay if the hostages are not released before January 20th, what does that mean?
Well, they're going to have to determine what that means. But it means it won't be pleasant.
Mr. President,
It's
how
not,
was your meeting?
it's not going to be pleasant, yeah?
How was your meeting with Apple CEO Tim Cook, and did you talk about tariffs in that meeting?
Meeting with who?
Apple CEO Tim Cook.
I did have dinner with Tim Cook. I had dinner with sort of almost all of them, and the rest are coming. And this is one of the big differences, I think, between, we were talking about it before, one of the big differences between the first term. In the first term, everybody was fighting me. In this term, everybody wants to be my friend. I don't know. My personality changed or something. But I had, as you know, I had Sundar from Google, but I also had Sergey. Nobody reported that. Sergey is the owner, the primary owner, along with his friend, as you know. And Sergey was here also. I can't believe you didn't pick that one up. Nobody picked that up. But I will tell you, no, it's a big difference. The big difference is that the first time everybody was fighting me on all fronts, and we had a great administration. We got the biggest tax cuts in history, rebuilt the military. Too much of it was given away to Afghanistan, stupidly given away, horribly given away. I think that's one of the reasons that Putin went in to Ukraine when he saw the stupidity of Milley and these guys. They're stupid people, very stupid people. If they didn't do such a bad, we were pulling out of Afghanistan, but I would have pulled out with dignity and strength. They wouldn't be having parades, I guarantee you, showing our equipment that they left behind, because we weren't going to leave any equipment behind, not 10 cents. We were going to take every screw and every bolt. Yeah, the biggest difference is that people want to get along with me this time. Well, they've gone through 4 years, and, it wasn't easy for me, but it wasn't easy for them either. And that's a great thing, though. Getting along is a great thing. So Tim Cook was here. I think he's done an incredible job at Apple, and he talked about the future of Apple. It's going to be a bright future. But we have many others also, and not in that business. And we do have Jeff Bezos, Amazon, coming in sometime during the week. Look forward to that. We have a lot of great executives coming in. The top executives, the top bankers, they're all calling. And honestly, in the first time, I don't know what it was. It's like a complete opposite. In the first one, and the press has covered that fairly, actually, for a change. The first one, they were very hostile. And maybe it was my fault, but I don't really think so. They were just very right from the beginning. And this one is much less hostile. It's really the opposite of hostile.
Can I get your reaction?
Well, you also need to give up a
Sir,
thought.
I know that you had some, I believe, involvement 18 years ago with the students at Duke accused of rape in lacrosse. Now we have this development.
I thought it was a hoax when it happened, the Duke situation. I didn't believe the woman, as you know, and they destroyed the lives of these kids. They destroyed, and I don't care what they got. Their lives have been destroyed. Their lives have been shortened by what took place. And now the woman admitted that it never happened. That is a horrible, and as you know, I took a lot of heat when I said that this did not happen. And those kids were beautiful kids with beautiful families, and they were, in some cases, will never be the same. They will never be the same.
Have you talked to them by chance?
Your thoughts on the Postal Service? You mentioned Bezos a second ago, and I've always thought Bezos would be a key person to go in there and really streamline the logistics of the post office, but they lose billions.
Well, there is talk about the Postal Service being taken private. You do know that. Not the worst idea I've ever heard. It really isn't. It's a lot different today with between Amazon and UPS and FedEx and all the things that you didn't have. But there is talk about that. It's an idea that a lot of people have liked for a long time. We're looking at it. I think we're looking at that along with a lot of others. Any questions for Howard, by the way? Commerce.
Sure, I'll ask one. Mr. Incoming Secretary, do you see another trade deal with China coming?
I think the president...
That's a tough one, right?
Yeah. Oh, it's easy for me. You're sitting next to me, so it's okay. No, the president has very clear agenda for tariffs. And I think reciprocity is something that is going to be a key topic for us. How you treat us is how you should expect to be treated.
Would you like to weigh in, sir, on that?
You said it so well, reciprocal. If they tax us, we tax them the same amount. They tax us, forgetting just for a second about the word tax, they tax us, we tax them. And they tax us, almost in all cases, they're taxing us, and we haven't been taxing them.
Is that deal already underway? Is there a deal already underway with respect to that?
Let's just say this, we're going to make great deals, and we have all the cards. And until I came along, don't forget, and Howard was going over the numbers with me last night, we took in $600 billion and more in taxes and tariffs from China. No other president took in 10 cents, not 10 cents, not 10 cents. And no, we're going to be doing things. We're going to be treating people very fairly. But the word reciprocal is important, because if somebody charges us, India, we don't have to talk about own. If India charges us 100% and we charge them nothing for the same, they send in a bicycle and we send them a bicycle, They charge us 100 and 200. India charges a lot. Brazil charges a lot. If they want to charge us, that's fine, but we're going to charge them the same thing. Okay? That's a big
Worried
thing.
about
And you
tariff.
know what? The senators, some of them aren't necessarily business people. When I give that to them, they say, that sounds fair to me.
Are you concerned that tariffs might hurt the stock market rise that you have seen and the economy more broadly?
Make our country rich. Tariffs will make our country rich.
But won't they raise prices?
Properly used. Will make, no, well, I didn't have any inflation, and I had massive tariffs on a lot of things. We put tariffs on steel. If I didn't put tariffs on steel, 50% and more, they were dumping steel in, China and others. I put tariffs on, and it stopped, and we took a fortune. We made a fortune on it. Tariffs, properly used, which we will do, and being reciprocal with other nations, but it'll make our country rich. Our country right now loses to everybody. Almost nobody do we have a surplus with. There are a couple of countries, and they're embarrassed by it, but almost nobody. And tariffs will make, I always said, to me, tariffs, the most beautiful word in the dictionary. It'll make our country rich. You go back and look at the 1890s, 1880s, McKinley, and you take a look at tariffs. That was when we were at our proportionately the richest.
Mr.
Did you get to a good spot?
Back on Ukraine, Mr. President. What should Zelensky, if anything, be prepared to give up to end this war?
He should be prepared to make a deal. That's all. Got to be a deal. No, got to be a deal. Too many people being killed. That is a war that's hard. Too many people. Got to make a deal. And Putin has to make a deal too.
What deal would you think?
Putin has to make a deal, and Putin would have never gone in if I was president. If I was president, we wouldn't have had inflation. Our oil prices would have been lower. I had a good relationship with Putin. He would, despite the Russia hoax, which made it more difficult. If we had that election, if it were an honorable election, we wouldn't have had any of the problems that we're talking about right now. Putin would have never got it.
Will you make that deal to give up take office? Do you still? You said that you could make that deal before you take office. Do you still think you could make that deal?
I'm going to try.
Will you ask Putin to give up Assad?
Well, I hadn't thought of it. I think we have to get on with our lives. We'll have to see what happens. But right now, Syria has a lot of, there's a lot of indefinites. Nobody knows what's going to happen with Syria. But I think Turkey is going to hold the key to Syria, actually. I don't think you've heard that from anybody else, but I've been pretty good at predicting. I want to thank you all, and we're going to make America great again. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
We've been listening to President-elect Donald Trump holding a news conference at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. Thanks for listening here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons in for Joe Matthew today, and Balance of Power begins right now. Now, Trump was holding that news conference in the aftermath of a meeting with Masayoshi Son, the CEO of SoftBank, who pledged to Trump as they met in Florida this morning to invest $100 billion in the U.S. over the next 4 years, including investing in artificial intelligence infrastructure and potentially bringing 100,000 jobs along with that. Obviously, though, as we all just heard, this news conference went a lot farther than just that SoftBank investment, touching on subjects ranging from taxes, the open Senate seat in Florida, assuming that Senator Marco Rubio gets confirmed to Trump's cabinet, the war in Ukraine, as we were just hearing about, tariffs, and many other things. Bloomberg senior Washington editor Wendy Benjaminson was listening to it along with the rest of us, and she is joining me now. Wendy, it's hard to know where to begin with this one, but if we could just begin on where that ended. Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary designate, standing next to President-elect Trump, talking about this notion of tariffs, and Trump pledging tariffs will make our country rich. This is, of course, after he talked about tax cuts at the very, very beginning of that news conference.
That's right. And this has been the line that Trump and Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary designate and chairman of the transition team, have been talking about since before the election, that tariffs was going to be essentially his main foreign policy tool for punishing countries, for righting the trade balance. Many economists don't believe that tariffs will do the trick in terms of bringing in enough revenue to offset the widely varied tax cuts that he has proposed during the campaign and that Congress is ready to start talking about. But it's clearly still, the order of the day in Trump world.
Well, and it's interesting. That's what's happening in Trump world down in Florida. There's something happening today here in Washington, Wendy, that actually worked its way into that news conference. And that's that RFK Jr., his nominee for Health and Human Services Secretary, is beginning meetings this week with senators as he tries to make his case that he should be confirmed. Trump talked about RFK, saying that he doesn't think he will be as radical as everyone else seems to think. He also suggested that the polio vaccine won't be lost. And I wonder what your reaction was to those comments.
Well, I think what Trump was doing there was speaking to Congress, to senators who were concerned about confirming RFK Jr. because of his, radical ideas that he's put out there about vaccines, the childhood vaccines that have kept America healthy and safe for many, many decades. He thinks they cause autism, which is a theory that has been widely debunked by the medical community. He believes they shouldn't be mandated, that they're, an unnecessary thing. He wants to take fluoride out of the water. But what Trump was doing there was saying, don't worry about it. I'm not going to let him be that radical. I like the polio vaccine, which is something that former Senate Leader McConnell, or current Senate Leader McConnell, who suffered polio as a child, has been saying, don't touch the polio vaccine. So I think this was an attempt by Trump to soften up the Senate, to think, okay, maybe Trump will put some guardrails on Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
All right, Wendy Benjaminson, thanks for your patience and sticking with us through what was a lengthy news conference from Donald Trump. And that's just scratching the surface, what we just discussed with Wendy. Really appreciate your time. As I mentioned, though, this all began with an important meeting that took place between Trump and Masayoshi Son, and a $100 billion investment in the U.S. that the SoftBank CEO is now pledging. So for more on that, let's bring in Michael Shepard. He is Bloomberg's senior editor for technology and strategic industries, joining me here in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Mike, this is a big investment. We've seen SoftBank do this before in 2016 when Trump was first elected, but that was a number, half what he's pledging now?
It was $50 billion, and it's almost 8 years to the date that Masayoshi Son approached Trump, then president-elect, at Trump Tower to make that offer then. $50 billion, 50,000 jobs in the U.S., and the investment largely carried through. There were a few hiccups. The WeWork investment didn't work out as well, but others really did pan out as hoped. And today, one of the most striking moments, perhaps, from the news conference right at the beginning was seeing Donald Trump in this moment of bonhomie with Masayoshi Son pressing this business leader from Japan to double the investment he had just agreed to make, and really putting him on the spot. And Son, interestingly, said that, look, I have great confidence in you, Mr. President, and in your incoming administration, and I will try to make that happen. So we'll have to see. Interesting thing is that, unlike last time around, Son doesn't have quite the amount of capital in the tank right at the moment to be able to pull that off. That's not to say he would not be able to raise it, and he has a great track record of doing so. But my colleague Peter Elstrom and I were talking about this earlier today, and $25 billion seems to be what he has on hand to work with. So he'll have some work trying to raise that capital to fulfill this pledge.
Well, of course, Trump has said all you need to do is invest $1 billion in the U.S. and you'll get expedited permits and everything. So I do wonder if it's 25 or 100, what that buys you.
Well, that's a great question, too. And he made that pledge on Truth Social last week, and he brought it up again today during the news conference. And that is one of the signals he is trying to send to the business community that, look, I'm going to be cutting your taxes. He has proposed cutting corporate taxes to 15% from the current 21%. And this is another sweetener. That is cutting the red tape that a lot of businesses see as an impediment to what they need to do. This is especially important to energy companies and tech companies. If you want to get into the artificial intelligence space, you really need access to a lot more power to help run those data centers. And they need clearance to get the grid upgrades and to get those power plants up and running so that those needs can be met.
Well, let's talk more about tech companies, because Donald Trump in this news conference was asked about the dinner he had at Mar-a-Lago on the patio on Friday with Tim Cook, of course, the Apple CEO. This is after he's met with Mark Zuckerberg, others as well, including, of course, Jeff Bezos, we understand, are making trips to Mar-a-Lago, if not donating to his inaugural fund. And Trump in that news conference said, I had dinner with almost all of them, I'm assuming referring to big tech executives, and the rest are coming. In this term, everybody wants to be my friend. He noted as well that Sergey Brin has come to dine with him at Mar-a-Lago. That is kind of true, right? Everybody's cozying up in this space.
Oh, they really are, Kaylee. And it is so striking to see how much they are trying to win the president's favor as compared to President-elect's favor as compared to 8 years ago when there was a lot of fear and trepidation, including from the business community and tech companies, where a lot of employees were wary of some of the things that he was talking about, especially in immigration, but in other areas too that they thought might hurt their business. This time around, interestingly, when we hear talk of tariffs, we're not hearing as much expression of concern from the tech sector. And that could be in part because the last time around, thanks to this good relationship with Tim Cook, he was able to protect Apple from some of the worst of it. And we will likely see a repeat of that. The two men, Cook and Trump, have enjoyed this good relationship even since he left office, and we can expect them to pick up where they left off. And for the other tech executives, this will be a playbook for them to follow as well, especially as they face questions about competition. We see the big antitrust push by the Biden administration. But remember, some of that was started during Trump's first term. Toward the end, the Justice Department began going after some of these companies, including Alphabet Inc., over their market scale, including in ad tech and other things. So what he can do to maybe bring some relief will be really interesting to watch.
All right, Bloomberg senior editor for technology and strategic industries, Michael Shepard, thank you so much. And Mike will be back later on in the late edition of Balance of Power at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. He'll be co-hosting the show with me this evening. And certainly, we have a lot to discuss. We've discussed a lot already, but one thing we haven't touched is the fact that this is the last legislative week of the year and of the 118th Congress. It begins today on Monday, and there's a government funding deadline on Friday, yet we still don't actually have a deal. We haven't seen the text, so we don't know how lawmakers are planning to avert a shutdown. For more on this now, I want to turn to Zach Cohen. He is Bloomberg Tax Congress reporter, joining me now on Balance of Power. So, Zach, I do want to get into tax and the reconciliation fight that's to come, but before we can get to that fight, we got to solve this one. How is this going to work over the next 5 days? Can it get done in time?
They are really in a time crunch at this point. There's a government funding deadline for this Friday, December 20th, which was set up in the last stopgap funding bill. And lo and behold, we're looking at another kick the can down the road maneuver where we're expecting lawmakers to essentially extend current government funding levels until next March, setting up another government shutdown deadline for very early in President-elect's Donald Trump's second term. A couple of those issues are still brewing in the background as they try to get to some sort of deal that can pass not just the House, but as well as the Senate very quickly, and then on to President Joe Biden's desk for his expected signature. They've got to work out some provisions around farm subsidies, especially in disaster-hit areas, counter-drone authorities, especially given what we've seen in New Jersey over the last couple of weeks. And all of those need to be figured out before they can send that bill from the House over to the Senate for an expected signature to avert a shutdown. Just a question of the timing at this point.
And then we'll have to do the whole song and dance over again in March once the new Congress is in place and Donald Trump is in the Oval Office. And perhaps even before they deal with the funding questions in March, they're going to be working on Trump's agenda right from the jump in the new year, Zach. It's just a question of sequencing and how big these reconciliation packages are going to be. We understand that this was a topic in the presidential suite at the Army-Navy game where the president-elect was, along with John Thune and Speaker Mike Johnson this weekend. We know Thune wants two parts. Is that ultimately what's going to happen here?
Certainly, if you have the incoming Senate Majority Leader John Thune, the Republican from South Dakota, who's replacing outgoing Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, as well as members of the White House, both them and Thune coming around to this idea of actually punting on any extension of the Trump-era tax cuts that were passed in 2017 and expiring at the end of 2025, dealing with those later in the year, and instead focusing on a much more politically palatable package of agenda items that were really the cornerstone of President-elect Trump's return to the White House, focusing on things like border security and energy. These are things that senior lawmakers are hoping kind of rally lawmakers around an early win in the next Trump administration, and then sets up the difficult conversations around how to extend a tax package, which we can talk a little bit more about. The key here is that Republicans will have a couple of different chances to pass a bill through what's called the budget reconciliation process, which is a convoluted maneuver that essentially allows them to bypass Democrats, including those that wield the majority in the Senate, and allows Republicans to basically pass whatever they want on spending and tax issues with just simple majorities. And so those inter-Republican debates are ongoing. And first, they got to figure out the when before they can figure out the how and the what.
Well, and this obviously is a concern for the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, Jason Smith, who has very much been on the one package train. He wants to put all of this together, including, as you were describing, the politically palatable border measures in with a tax package in case there's trickiness around things like, say, the SALT cap, which I think we can all anticipate. So if this is going to be a package that stands on its own, just how complicated will it be for him and for House leadership to get the requisite vote, Zach?
That's exactly right. I was actually talking to Ways and Means Chairman Jason Smith last week, and he said, look, I know how to get a tax package done, and these are my words and not his, but there's something called the politics of addition. If you give lawmakers a lot of different reasons to vote for a package, it makes it a lot harder for them to vote against it. And House Republicans are dealing with a super narrow majority. It's going to be at least one seat at some point once some of these new cabinet appointees get confirmed and appointed to the second Trump administration, which House Speaker Mike Johnson wasn't thrilled about, and exactly for this reason. They're going to work out some thorny issues in the tax package, like the SALT cap, which would be a rather expensive proposition from people like New York and New Jersey, California, trying to lift that cap after it was set at $10,000 in the last tax package during the Trump administration. But that's going to rub some fiscal hawks wrong, who are hoping to offset a lot of these increases in the overall deficit impact of an eventual tax package. President-elect Trump at this press conference said he does want to see offsets for anything that would eventually increase the deficit in this package, estimated at $4.6 trillion over the next 10 years. Unlikely they find that many offsets, certainly. But how they work out some of these issues, even though Republicans will have carte blanche authority over how to do this, working through those thornier issues is going to be really tricky.
All right. I know you're going to have fun covering it. Zach Cohen, Bloomberg Tax Congress reporter, thank you so much for joining me here on Balance of Power. And of course, when we consider the math in the tax equation, the president-elect also contends that some of those lower taxes will be offset by higher tariffs, which will bring more money into the Treasury's coffers, not just on countries like China, but also, say, our neighbor to the north, Canada. He has threatened, of course, to put a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods if they don't address the people and drugs he says are flowing over the northern border. And that has led to some relatively stunning news on this Monday from Canada. The finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, has resigned from Justin Trudeau's cabinet. And it seems to be their issue was on how to handle the incoming Trump administration and the threat of those tariffs. So joining me now with more is Josh Wingrove. He is a White House correspondent for us here at Bloomberg, also happens to be a proud Canadian, here with me in our Washington, D.C. studio. So Josh, just how shocking is this? How critical was she in Trudeau's government?
Yeah, I'm trying to explain this to my 18-month-old two daughter, and she's just not interested. I mean, this is, our Canadian colleagues are busy reporting on this right now, so thank you. You're stuck with me trying to explain it. It's difficult to overstate how big a blow this is to Trudeau. Right now, he has lost a sort of a string of ministers sort of bowing out, saying they won't seek re-election, including just last night, reportedly, the housing minister is a rising star of his party, bowing out. Housing is a huge political issue in Canada. But this today has almost no precedent in his 9 years or whatever it is now as prime minister. Chrystia Freeland is his deputy prime minister. His finance minister for years has been, in the eyes of many, his heir apparent. Today is the fall economic statement, essentially a mini budget. She resigned on the eve of that, bailed on giving the speech in dispute over it. And you say she's citing this tariff war, and there is an element of truth to that, no doubt. But more broadly, Trudeau's been in trouble for some time. He's been trying to sort of turn it around, been declining in the polls. And now to have his most sort of loyal, long-standing lieutenant bow out is wild. And I should note, insists that she's staying in Parliament. In other words, not going quietly into the night. So this is a five-alarm crisis right now for the Prime Minister. Who knows where it's going to lead, but he has not had a defection of this scale in his time yet. And with an election, potentially months, has to be months away, but this is maybe raising the prospect of an election much more soon than would have otherwise been the case.
Well, so if we zero in on this tariff idea, though, in her statement, she said in part that Canada needs to keep, quote, our fiscal powder dry today so we have the reserves we may need for a coming tariff war. She did say may in there, Josh, so hedging a little bit, and I guess it just kind of speaks to the question that it's very unclear whether or not Trump intends to follow through on this or is just negotiating in public.
Yeah, and we heard just now from President-elect Trump on that, and from Howard Lutnick, his Commerce Secretary and Trade Czar, who didn't really indicate that the stuff that's been put in the window so far by the Canadians and Mexicans would be enough to head off that thing. In fact, Trump raised again this notion of trade balances. He's really preoccupied with trade deficits and surpluses. The U.S. has a trade deficit, both with Canada and Mexico, bigger with Mexico. So he seems to be latching on to that. And the question for Trudeau is, who would he bring to the fight? Last time around, it was Chrystia Freeland. She was his point person in D.C. all the time. I covered her in some of those moments. This time around, when Trudeau went down to Palm Beach the day after Thanksgiving, he brought a different minister, didn't bring Freeland. So there's been at least perceived tension, or at least question, as to who the lead person will be for some time. Now, with the powder dry thing, Trudeau's been putting sort of things in the window to try to appease anger over inflation. Joe Biden can tell you how mad voters are about inflation these days, including a GST holiday, a sales tax holiday up there, as well as the notion of sending checks to people. It seems to be that that's what Chrystia Freeland is pushing back against there. But right now, this is just sort of a major question for him and his future. And Trudeau has, until now, insisted that he would stay on as leader. Of course, time will tell. Remember, he's only prime minister because leader of the party that commands the confidence of Parliament right now. If the party mood changes, things can change really quick.
Well, and we'll see how much tariffs change the mood as well, if it does ultimately result in changes to prices. This is actually something that Joe Matthew talked about with the Canadian ambassador to the U.S. on this show. Earlier this month, Kristen Hillman was asked about tariffs, and this is what she said on Balance of Power.
On the tariffs, look, we don't think they're a good idea. They won't be good for Canada, and we don't think they're good for the United States. We are the biggest customer by far of U.S. exporters. 36 states count us as their number one export market. So it's really important, sort of in terms of actual volumes, but also in terms of what we trade together, some of the strategic goods that we don't want to be getting from our non-allied countries. So we're making that case, and we're hopeful that will win the day.
It's a reminder, Josh, that trade goes both ways. So it's one thing for imports, it's another for the things Canada is exporting to us. And the question of retaliation is a big one. What would Canada likely hit if Trump goes ahead with this?
So in the first time, they did dollar for dollar tariff retaliation when it was things like steel and aluminum. They hit back on things like bourbon. They tried to pick politically high-profile things to put tariffs on. This time around, it remains up in the air, but our colleague Brian Platt has some great reporting over the past week or so that Canada is even considering export tariffs on things the U.S. might try to exempt, namely oil. That's Canada's top export.
Trump cares a lot about.
Trump cares a lot about it. U.S. buying oil is why the U.S. has a trade deficit with Canada, or at least a big contributor to it. And so the thought seems to be with the Canadians that if Trump applies tariffs, he might exclude oil because he doesn't want to raise the cost of energy for Americans. But Canada, to maintain that leverage, will put an export tariff on oil. In other words, take away his exclusion so that the price will go up for Americans. So they're going to target, whatever they can, both high-profile things. I wouldn't rule out bourbon. Who knows? But there's been no reporting, or at least I haven't seen any specifically to that. But oil will be a big battleground on this when it comes down to it. But this is just a major moment. I've been trying to figure out a way to explain to Americans, like if Kamala Harris had resigned, on the day of Joe Biden's debate, that's a rough, bad analogy, but it's in that scale of like seismic sort of shaking of the status quo of the government. Now, where they go from there, it's pretty uncharted right now.
Well, I thought your explanation was excellent. Josh Woodrow, Bloomberg White House correspondent, here with me in Washington, D.C., as we keep an eye on what's happening in Canada. As Josh said, it was pretty earth-shaking to see that news from Freeland today. So we have much more ahead here on Balance of Power, but it's been too long and we haven't checked on the financial markets. So let's get a look at those now with Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there, Kaylee Lines. Good day from New York. Right now we are looking at the Dow lower, the S&P NASDAQ. They are both advancing, with the S&P climbing 26 points. We now stand at 6,077, up by about 0.4%. The Dow, though, in the red, down 27, a drop there of 0.1%. The NASDAQ Composite Index continues to push higher, 20,137 on NASDAQ, up now by 1.1%. The Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares up now by 0.7%. Stocks are climbing as traders gear up for an interest rate decision Wednesday, not just in the U.S., but also this week. We've got major central banks across the globe later in the week. Bitcoin climbing to a record. Bitcoin right now up $4,000 $107,107. 107,119 now on Bitcoin. That is a gain of 4.2%. Your 10-year yield, 4.40%, with the 2-year, 4.24%. Gold up $5.50 the ounce, 26.54, up 0.2%, and a retreat for crude down now by 0.5%, 70.94 a barrel on WTI. So again, Bitcoin bears repeating, a surge to $107,000, up 4.1%. S&P up 0.5, 10-year yield 4.40%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. And Balance of Power continues. Now back we go to Washington once again. Here she is, Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet, looking in on the start of this trading week. Thank you so much. Now here in Washington, it's the start of the legislative week. In fact, the last one of the year. And the last week that Senator Mitch McConnell will spend as the leader of the Republicans in the upper chamber. He, of course, is stepping back from that role, staying in the Senate, and John Thune will come in as the Senate Majority Leader in January. McConnell, of course, has been one of the staunchest pro-Ukraine voices on Capitol Hill. And he has one of those warnings about that and other foreign policy issues that he's issuing today before he takes a step back from leadership. He's out with a new opinion piece in Foreign Affairs magazine. It's entitled "The Price of American Retreat: Why Washington Must Reject Isolationism and Embrace Primacy." It lists the consequences of pushing an American-first foreign policy, and he writes, "America will not be made great again by those who simply want to manage its decline." For more now, we turn to our signature political panel. Rick Davis, Republican strategist and Stone Court Capital partner, alongside Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, our Democratic analyst, and a senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. So, Rick, obviously it is a powerful piece from Mitch McConnell, but I wonder how it will fall on whose ears, how powerful his voice is going to be, not just now, but especially looking ahead to the next Congress, this administration. He will be playing more of a backseat role on these matters.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because he kind of says, pox on all your houses. He goes back almost 2 decades and criticizes various Republican and Democratic administrations prior to this upcoming one and the policies that sort of got us to where we are, and then makes a full-throated endorsement of the importance of investment in national security and engagement around the world. So he's made it totally clear to his fellow senators that he's going to use the next 2 years, first 2 years of the Trump administration, pushing this kind of global interaction to stem the growth of our enemies, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, and promote the U.S. as the traffic cop of the world. And he's said this repeatedly, the same material that's in the piece today at recently the Reagan Defense Forum just less than a month ago, where he articulated this vision also for a very defense-focused crowd. So this is going to be his signature activity for the next couple of years.
Well, it was interesting, Jeannie. He also, at the end of the piece, talked about the restoration of American hard power, but specifically called out what he described as right-wing flirtation with isolation and decline. But I wonder if this really is just flirtation, Jeannie, if arguably more isolationism is what the American people voted for when they chose Donald Trump in November.
Yeah, and that's the argument you hear from a number of Republicans, certainly in the MAGA wing. And, you know, as Mitch McConnell steps down from leadership, he is going to be chairing the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. So he's going to have a place by which to continue to make these arguments. And I think it's just fascinating because as we look back on Project 2025, which so many Democrats looked at as a conservative playbook, one of the things in the Russia-Ukraine chapter that was notable was the author said the words, "This issue starkly divides conservatives." And she talked about the fact that this was something that was going to be very difficult for the Republican Party to manage for that reason. And of course, you see this today. And as Rick mentioned, you've heard Mitch McConnell say this before. This is a wedge issue within the Republican Party that is going to be debated in the next Congress and in foreign policy circles as we go forward.
Well, we heard more about foreign policy from the president-elect earlier this hour when he was holding a news conference at Mar-a-Lago. He talked about the fact that there needs to be a deal between Russia and Ukraine. Rick, he also mentioned that he hasn't formally invited Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to his inauguration, but he can come if he wants, as could President Xi of China. And I wonder whether it's an adversary or an ally, if you see any foreign leader as having business attending the inauguration of a U.S. president.
Well, it is a unique thing for a head of state to attend the inauguration of a U.S. president. Typically, we have a large cache of ambassadors, U.S. ambassadors from foreign countries who attend the inaugural. There's a special program to seat them together and to honor them when they're there. So it's not like there isn't some representation that typically is at the inaugural. But as we heard from President-elect Trump today during his press conference, he kind of blanket invited everybody and chose to actually add some ambiguity to whether or not she would show up or not. But the bottom line is, it's actually a nice thing, I think, for the president to welcome any head of state who'd want to come. And it does break with a little bit of tradition, but honestly, it's not a tradition that particularly has any impact. I would say, just as a pitch, I don't think the U.S. strength abroad is a wedge issue in the Republican Party. 70 United States senators voted for Ukraine, and an overwhelming number of House members, Republican and Democratic alike, voted for the same. So when you look at polling within the Republican Party, overwhelmingly supports Ukraine and the fight that's going on there with Russia. So and even Donald Trump has said, that what he endorses is a Reagan construct of peace through strength, build up the Defense Department so that people don't choose to attack our allies or ourselves. So I think that it's much more traditional than people give it credit for. Sure, within a group of the protectionists in the party, there's always this kind of noise, but it certainly doesn't, I think, look like a split in the party at this stage.
Well, on that, Jeannie, we just have a minute left here, but how much will the voice of one member of the Republican Senate minority at this point, but should join the administration if all goes how we think it will, Marco Rubio, how much will his voice as Secretary of State matter?
Oh, it's going to matter a good deal. Marco Rubio has been in this traditional view. He's now joining a administration in which the president, at that press conference you mentioned, when he was asked, should the Ukraine cede territory to Russia, he kept it open that he said, I'll let you know. So he kept that idea open. So this is, and I disagree with Rick, this is an issue that divides Republicans. You don't believe me? Look at Project 2025. They say it. They say it very, very clearly. And they use the term starkly divides conservatives. And that stark division is going to be on display as we go forward.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our signature political panel. They'll be back with me for more in the second hour of Balance of Power, where we'll also bring you an important conversation with the incoming chair of the House Financial Services Committee. Congressman French Hill of Arkansas will be joining me in just a few moments, so stick with us here on Bloomberg Radio.
of politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
It's the week of a government funding deadline, and we still have no deal. Welcome to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lines, and we'll bring you the latest from Capitol Hill this hour in an important conversation with the incoming chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. Congressman French Hill will be with me in just a few moments. Plus, as Trump's Health and Human Services Secretary nominee, RFK Jr., takes to the Hill himself for meetings with senators, we'll discuss his prospects with our signature political panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. We'll bring you the latest on the Middle East as well after Antony Blinken, wrapping up his trip to the region, says the U.S. has made direct contact with Syrian rebel group HTS in the aftermath of the downfall of Bashar al-Assad's regime. We'll have more with Mara Rudman of the University of Virginia Center for Politics. It's a lot we still have to bring you this hour, but we begin, as always, with a check on the markets. Charlie Pellet has a look from New York. Hey, Charlie.
Thank you very much. And here's what's going on, Kaylee Lines. Back to work Monday. We got the S&P pushing higher, up another 27, now at 6,078. That is a gain right now of just about 0.5%. The Dow, though, in the red, down 58. Dow Industrials down 0.1%, while the NASDAQ Composite Index is pushing higher. We got NASDAQ up 225. NASDAQ up now by just about 1.3%. The 10-year 4.40%, and we have got the 2-year right now 4.24%. Gold up $4 the ounce, little changed, up 0.1%, 26.52 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude oil right now down 0.5%, 70.92 a barrel on WTI. But Bitcoin now above $107,000. Bitcoin up now by just about 4.1%. Bitcoin reaching a record as President-elect Trump's support for digital assets and optimism about MicroStrategy's inclusion in the NASDAQ 100 index helping fuel today's gains. MicroStrategy right now surging by 6.2%. So again, recapping here, the Dow lower, down 0.1%. S&P right now up by just about 0.5%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington once again. Your host, here she is, Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you so much. It's going to be a busy week here in Washington as the 118th Congress tries to wrap up its work for the year. That, of course, will include finding a way to keep the government open past midnight on Friday, where the deadline is, and we have no deal yet as to how exactly that happens. We know it will be a stopgap measure of some time, likely going into March. We just don't know how exactly the sausage is going to be made and what compromise the Democrat and Republican leaders in both chambers will reach. But we do know it does need to get done and get a signature from President Biden by that deadline on Friday so that when we come back in January and the 119th Congress takes its seats, they can get started on their to-do list. And certainly the incoming chairs of the various committees in the House have to-do lists of their own. And one of them is joining us now here on Bloomberg TV and radio. He was just named the incoming chair of the House Financial Services Committee and is live with me from Capitol Hill, Congressman French Hill of Arkansas. Congratulations, sir, first and foremost, for getting the gavel here. And I do want to get into everything you want to accomplish in financial services in the 2 years ahead. Could we just begin, though, with what exactly is going to happen this week, as there's not a lot of time to work with here, and I wonder if the 72-hour rule to read this stopgap legislation after it's released is going to have to be waived.
Well, Kaylee, it's always good to be with you. Thanks for having me. Usually we hope to have that bill posted over the weekend, and we didn't see it. So you're right, we may be confronted with a tight time frame in order to review it before we have to vote on it and get the Senate to approve it before Friday.
Well, that certainly is true. And when we talk about it being a deal making here, we understand that the Speaker is looking for economic aid to farmers and might need to offer out something else to Democrats in exchange for that. Are you concerned at all about what additional provisions Democrats want could work its way into this continuing resolution?
Well, sure, because the real issue is that the continuing resolution be done at the Fiscal Responsibility Act levels. This is the agreement. I think the Speaker's done an outstanding job negotiating that. But our farm counties in this country are facing a crisis. The last 3 years have been bad on pricing. There were high supplies in a number of commodities this year, which depressed price further. So they've had high costs from the Ukraine invasion, plus now low prices this year. So it's tough to be refinanced if you've had 3 bad years of a row. I was an ag lender many, many years ago in banking, so I know how tough that is. The Speaker is trying to get a deal where we just simply help the farm economy. I don't know why the Democrats are trying to take advantage of farmers who are hurting. This is not like it's a Republican policy. It's an American policy to try to help these farmers get through a tough period.
Well, I'm glad you raised your background as once being a lender and community banker, sir. As we understand, that is one of the reasons why you were able to win the gavel in what was a competitive race for the chairmanship of financial services. So let's get into what you want to accomplish. I'd like to begin with crypto, as this is Bloomberg TV and radio. We obviously saw, as you chaired the Digital Asset Subcommittee, through your committee and the House, the passage of the FIT 21 Act, crypto market structure legislation that divvied up responsibilities between the CFTC and SEC. Are you going to start there and make changes, or would you rather start from scratch when it comes to crypto market structure?
Well, first, Dusty Johnson from South Dakota and G.T. Thompson of Pennsylvania, both on the Ag Committee, were my partners. They'll be my partners again in this Congress. We don't have a learning curve here. We can take the lessons that we learned in the 118th Congress by producing FIT, which was a bill that got 71 Democratic votes here in the House, and the work that Chairman McHenry did with Ranking Member Maxine Waters on a stablecoin bill. Both those will be priorities coming into the new Congress. We want to work with the Trump administration and Senate Banking Committee Chairman Tim Scott and try to get all of us on the same page as to how do we proceed in the 119th. We've got new interest in the Senate. Bill Hagerty of Tennessee introduced his own bill in and around digital assets just before the election.
Well, so when we consider, though, the actual market structure questions here, obviously when FIT 21 was passed, Gary Gensler was the chair of the SEC, as he is now. That will be changing in the new administration. Presumably it will be Paul Atkins. And I wonder if you're more comfortable with the SEC having greater authority over crypto compared to the CFTC under that kind of regime, if it's no longer going to be Gary Gensler at the helm.
Well, we didn't draft the FIT 21 legislation because Gary Gensler was the chairman of the SEC. We drafted it because we thought there needed to be clear, transparent, fit-for-purpose rules of the road for digital asset companies so that tokens that are on a decentralized functioning blockchain are treated differently. They're not treated as securities, and we put that in law and defined exactly how to do it. And I think that's still important for the SEC under President Trump and Paul Atkins as the chairman-elect, because there's some things you can do by exemptive relief at the SEC, but there are other things that you actually need statutory work for. We're prepared to work with the new chairman, the new commission, but permanent changes come from making legal changes, not just doing exemptive relief at the commission. So I prefer a legislative solution, but I want to work with the chairman and see how we can work together.
Well, and I do wonder about the working with not just other chairmen in the House and in the Senate, but others in this administration, like, say, David Sachs, Congressman. What is your relationship like with him or with other agencies that we understand the White House will be giving a voice here in the shaping of crypto policy?
Well, we had a great relationship with the banking regulators, the Treasury, and the White House and the Biden administration on this topic, and I expect this will be even better in the Trump administration. The National Economic Council with Kevin Hastert and Treasury Secretary Designate Bessent, the banking supervisors that President Trump will appoint. All of us will work together along with the SEC chairman on crafting the best policy for digital assets. We want America to have a growth policy and a fairness and a transparent policy on how to have a digital asset economy here in America that produces growth. We want to add employees here. We don't want this business driven offshore as we witnessed during the Gensler and Biden-Harris regime.
Well, we know the president-elect has talked about making the U.S. the Bitcoin capital of the world. He's also floated this notion, sir, of a Bitcoin reserve. Do you have any concerns with an establishment of that?
Well, actually, I think Senator Loomis floated the idea of the reserve, and President Trump heard about it when he was at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville during July. This is something that has to be looked at carefully if that has benefits to the U.S. Treasury and to the U.S. balance sheet. And I'm sure Congress and members on both sides of the Capitol will do that.
As we get into other banking matters as well, would you support a move to abolish the FDIC and to fold its duties into the Treasury Department?
I think you've got to look at whatever proposals that the incoming administration has as part of a matrix. Like, what is the big picture objective here? Most people in Congress want outstanding, coordinated, harmonized supervision of our financial institutions that encourage new banks, encourage growth, encourage fair-minded rules and capital standards, and they don't want to create a situation where our community banks are going out of business because they can't comply with all the rules. And we want tailoring. That is, we want smaller banks with simpler balance sheets and simpler strategies to be treated differently than a big, large, complex company like Citibank or JP Morgan Chase. But we're willing to listen to what proposals that the administration has on supervisory changes.
So that's not a no, that you wouldn't necessarily be opposed from the start on abolishing the FDIC or shifting the way in which that insurance mechanism actually happens in the U.S.?
Well, I don't personally. I've never seen anybody submit an idea like that. I've read about it in the newspaper, but I think deposit insurance is an important feature. We want to make sure it's run right. The FDIC has poor leadership right now, but it's been an institution that's carried out its mission in a very tailored way. And I would just argue that we have mostly in the Biden-Harris regime a personnel problem, not a structural problem. But the supervisory process in our country between state and federal supervisors has gotten convoluted. It's gotten in conflict with each other. It's not harmonized. It's not coordinated. And so there are a lot of improvements that need to be made, in my view, in bank supervision. So again, I'm open-minded about how those could be made, but just taking one out of context and saying that you should do away with the FDIC, I don't think is particularly the right way to go about it.
Well, if it is to stick around, what do you see, whoever Trump taps to lead the FDIC and the OCC for that matter, as their chief priority? What would you hope that they deal with first?
Well, first, tailoring, following the law, making sure that they're light touch regulation where it's deserved and heavy complex touch regulation where it's merited because of the nature of the business. Further, I think they have to understand that fintech is here and AI is here, and they need to deal with that reality and make sure that all banks of all sizes and broker-dealers of all sizes are treated in the right way according with their business plan. But debanking businesses because they're involved in the fintech or the crypto business is not a good approach, and that's what we've seen in the Biden-Harris administration. And in my view, that's a key point to get changed as we change administrations. We do not want customers debanked because they're in a legal business, and we don't want to see banks and thrifts or credit unions or broker-dealers treated inappropriately by the supervisors.
Well, certainly we've seen a number of pursuits during this administration in regard to banking, including, of course, the initial proposal of the Basel III endgame by the Fed's Vice Chair of Supervision, Michael Barr. That obviously is now being changed. It's unclear what form it's ultimately going to take, sir. And I do wonder how you at the Financial Services Committee are hoping to shape ultimately that endgame and what's going to happen to capital requirements, assuming Michael Barr is still going to be the guy in this role.
Well, look, the Board of Governors is responsible for, obviously, that decision, and I don't believe that the Board of Governors is supportive of Basel III endgame as proposed. I think President Trump should withdraw that rule and re-propose whatever the right, more balanced approach is. It got thousands of comments. They were all negative, and I don't believe that the Biden-Harris's effort to just simply tweak the proposal and re-release it is the way to go. I think it should be withdrawn and then it'd be reconsidered by the Trump administration.
As we consider other Biden-era banking policies, would you support a congressional review through the Congressional Review Act of any of them?
Well, we have. We've done that for the small business data reporting, which is Section 1071. That was a CFPB proposal. We've done that for the Corporate Transparency Act, which I still hope gets put in the CR this week to delay that. This is this beneficial ownership reporting for 32 million American small businesses that I believe is the wrong approach and handled in an incorrect way. So I hope that we can use, we've used the CRA for that, and we want to try to delay the implementation of that for a year to give us an opportunity to reconsider it. We'll use the Congressional Review Act. We'll use our Article 1 power on funding through looking at activities in the Financial Services Committee that are not currently authorized. And so we're going to use all the oversight authorities that we have at House Financial Services to roll back what we believe to be an inappropriate level of regulation proposed by Biden and Harris.
I'd like to ask you as well, Congressman, about something we're hearing a lot about in Washington these days as we get ready for the second administration and for the DOJ to make their recommendations. It's this idea of remote work, or perhaps a return to working in the office instead of working remotely for those who work in Washington through federal agencies. Is there anything Congress can do to help the administration, this incoming administration, see through that goal of having people return to the office, even if there's existing union contracts that allow them to work from home?
Well, I think this is the advantage of the DOJ process with Vivek and Elon. I think it's good to have for-profit business executives look at the sedimentary regulatory burden that's been built up over years, and also the HR and work practices in the bureaucracy, and try to find ways to do things in a more effective way, efficient way, and where possible, get out of certain businesses that are not necessary. We have a real issue here in Washington, D.C. I think the last number I saw, Kaylee, was only about 40% of the federal workforce in the District of Columbia is in the office. And so the question is that appropriate or inappropriate based on the kind of work that they're doing? We've seen since the pandemic the whole economy shift workflows. And so from a federal government point of view, maybe they don't need to do that in some areas, like if you're working in an auditing capacity, maybe you're on the road a lot or working from a computer and you want to do that from home. But that's the kind of good, straightforward look I think we'll get from DOJ and Vivek and Elon as they work with these cabinet secretaries to assess workloads, management techniques, the use of technology, and the use of where people should be during the workday.
All right, Congressman, thank you so much for being generous with your time on Bloomberg TV and radio today. That's Republican Congressman French Hill of Arkansas, the incoming chairman of the House Financial Services Committee. Happy holidays to you, sir, and we'll see you in the 119th when he, of course, will be taking that gavel. We still have much more ahead here on Balance of Power. He, of course, was just talking about the DOJ, those two co-leaders of the DOJ, Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk. We're in the D.C. area, in Landover, Maryland, specifically this weekend, at the Army-Navy game, with a laundry list of others, including President-elect Donald Trump, the House Speaker Mike Johnson, the incoming Senate Majority Leader John Thune. Reconciliation and what exactly is going to happen with taxes in the budget next year was on the agenda. And, of course, there were cabinet nominees in tow as well. So we're going to get into that next. Our signature political panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, will join me on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's 121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg, and we begin with a developing story, a school shooting in Wisconsin. Multiple injuries have been reported in a shooting at a Christian school in Wisconsin. Police say the shooting occurred at the Abundant Life Christian School in Madison. Now, police in Madison say it remains an active and ongoing investigation. They're asking people to avoid the area. Police have blocked off roads around the school this afternoon. According to its website, Abundant Life is a non-denominational school, has about 390 students ranging from kindergarten through high school. So again, initial reports, multiple injuries at a Christian school in Wisconsin. Stocks are trading higher right now with the S&P 500 index advancing 31 points, up by about 0.5%. We've got the Dow down 40, a drop there of 0.1%. NASDAQ up 247. That is an advance of 1.2%. The 10-year at 4.40%. The 2-year 4.24%. And we've got gold up $3 the ounce, up 0.1%. $26.51 the ounce. A retreat for crude down 0.4%. $71.03 for a barrel of WTI. Bitcoin, major story today, crossing above 107,000. Bitcoin right now up by 4.4%. Again, repeating our top story, multiple injuries reported at a Christian school in Madison, Wisconsin. Stay with Bloomberg for the latest on this developing story. S&P again up by 0.5%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. Balance of Power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host. Here she is, Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie Pellet with the latest in financial markets. Thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, where we've been dealing with a lot of news today, including news from down in Florida, where at Mar-a-Lago, the CEO of SoftBank, Masayoshi Son, met with Donald Trump this morning, pledging to invest $100 billion in the U.S. over the next 4 years. That money to be spent on things like infrastructure to support artificial intelligence apparently could bring 100,000 jobs with it. Now, their meeting was followed by a press conference in which we heard from both of them. Donald Trump we heard from for an extended period of time on a number of subjects well beyond just this SoftBank investment. And we want to get into all of that now with Laura Davison, who is Bloomberg Politics editor, here with me in our Washington, D.C. studio. So, Laura, in that press conference, he did talk about this SoftBank investment, but he also talked about the fact that Tim Cook and a number of other tech executives have come to visit him at Mar-a-Lago. He says this term is different, that everyone wants to be his friend now in the tech world. And I guess we add Masayoshi Son to that list of people who want to get friendly with the president-elect.
Yes, there have been a series of meetings in the past couple of days. We've had Mark Zuckerberg go down. We've had the Google CEO Pichai. We've had Bezos is scheduled to come this week. On Friday, he met with Tim Cook from Apple. So there is a real outreach from the business community that just didn't happen 8 years ago. Part of this was they didn't know Trump. They didn't know how he operated. They didn't even know, who in his orbit to call to even set up a meeting. And now you have people realizing that this is, if they want to be in Trump's good graces, if they want to have this personal relationship, because that's how he does business, they need to personally go there, set up a meeting, set up a dinner. This worked out really well for Tim Cook during the first term. He was, it was sort of a rarity among big CEOs who went down, and he was able to fend off most of the tariffs that Trump was going to impose on iPhones. So you see this recognition from people saying, look, we need to go down, we need to meet with them, and potentially be able to influence some of these decisions before things that we don't like tariffs, come down the pike.
Well, so I do wonder about sequencing here when it comes to the SoftBank investment in particular, because it was just last week, Trump posted on Truth Social, hey, if you want to invest $1 billion in the U.S., I'll get you expedited permits, get ready to rock. And Masayoshi Son comes in a week later and says, how about $100 billion? Is there a line connecting those two things?
There certainly is. And this is sort of a move that SoftBank has done in the past. They have previously said they would invest $50 billion. That had some kind of went down in a couple of ways with deals not actually following through, but kind of coming in with a big headline number saying, look, we're going to invest $100 billion, really starts almost kind of this bidding war between other companies saying, hey, look, we're bringing this money, we're bringing this jobs what can you do for us, Mr. President? They, even Masayoshi Son, SoftBank CEO, got a press conference out of this. So that's a real, a real tangible benefit that attaches that, saying, look, I have, essentially the most powerful man in the world who is, willing to give his first press conference really since becoming president or since becoming president-elect. That's a major mark for SoftBank.
Well, and just quickly on that, Laura, this was an extended press conference. It went well beyond the SoftBank investment. We touched Ukraine. We touched who's invited to the inauguration, tariffs, taxes, January 6th, the polio vaccine. What stood out to you the most of this morning's extended affair?
I mean, a couple things. One is this is on Laura Trump and the Senate seat. He mentioned that he does not think that DeSantis is going to give that a seat to her. He also was very critical of Biden on several things, on the foreign wars, on Ukraine, on Israel, but also on the drone sightings that have continued to spark concern, particularly in the Northeast. He said that the government knows something and they should reveal it. He did not cite any evidence for that. It's not clear. The Pentagon and the White House have come out and said there's no risk there, but this is clearly going to be a flashpoint going forward as well.
Yeah, everybody's obsessed with the drones now. I have questions about the drones. I think we all do. Bloomberg's Laura Davison, our politics editor here in Washington. Thank you so much. Now, before Donald Trump was in Mar-a-Lago today, he spent part of his weekend in this area, in Landover, Maryland, at the Army-Navy game, which, of course, was a big deal in part because Navy pretty much dominated, played a great game, go Navy, but also because, along with Donald Trump, there were a number of other high-profile individuals in attendance, including Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, who are going to be running this Department of Government Efficiency, cabinet secretary nominees, including Pete Hegseth, who has been tapped for the Department of Defense, and Tulsi Gabbard for the Director of National Intelligence. And you had Senator John Thune, the incoming Senate Majority Leader, as well as House Speaker Mike Johnson, discussing things with the president, not just football, but how they want to deal with Trump's agenda when he takes office. It's a question of sequencing here. Do you pass one budget reconciliation package with everything in it, or do you split it up, dealing with the border first and taxes later? So let's get into this now with our signature political panel. Rick Davis, Stone Court Capital partner and Republican strategist, alongside Democratic strategist Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, who is a senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. So, Jeannie, if we consider how all of this is going to shake out, it's very likely, it seems, that this is going to end up in two packages, right? We're going to try to get something done immediately on the border, which Donald Trump campaigned on, and then wait for his other campaign promise on taxes until later in the year?
Yeah, I think so. It's clearly, I mean, we have heard Trump's associates, some of the closest aides he has, make the case, such as Stephen Miller, that that's how it should be done. We have heard from the incoming majority leader of the Senate. There has been some pushback on the House side. But, as you look at it and the difficulty of doing this, I think it does make sense for him, as far as possible, to get a win.